The story begins with the subjects bustling about and shouting that it was necessary to search everything and catch the runaway girl. The out-of-breath, blonde-haired fugitive peered through the crack at them and prayed that she would not be found. Only while she was completely focused on the people in the other room, she didn't notice how someone quietly approached her from behind. When the blue-eyed girl finally felt the presence of a stranger behind her, it was already too late to run. The man who appeared carefully ran his fingers through her strands of hair, and the girl froze in fear, holding her breath. The stranger playfully asked who she was. A night guest or an illegal passenger? After the question was asked, the girl finally turned around and saw a tall blonde man with golden eyes. She recognized him as Prince Khalid and realized that she needed to remain on guard. The prince noted with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time, turning to a girl named Veronica. Veronica then tried to assure Khalid that he was mistaken, but he ordered her not to make excuses. The man asked what she was doing on his ship. Veronica was surprised, because she was sure that she was boarding another ship. Pressing the girl against the wall, the prince asked if she wanted to tell him anything. Without answering the question, the blonde tried to escape, but the ship suddenly moved. Veronica lost her balance, after which Khalid grabbed the girl by the wrists, and she could not resist him. The blonde leaned forward, wanting to kiss Veronica, and she moved towards him. Prince Khalid carried the girl to his chambers and kissed her again, unable to resist his feelings. Before she got on the ship, Veronica Hillsdale looked a little different and had a different hair color. At the trial, the girl was found to be a traitor and sentenced to death. The gray-haired judge, after passing the sentence, asked Veronica if she wanted to say anything before she died. The girl asked the jury impenetrably if they wanted to hear her last words. The meeting was held outdoors, and at that moment it started to rain heavily. Veronica closed her eyes and humbly enjoyed the raindrops running down her face. She said that she naturally had something to say. The girl did not understand, since when love became a sin. Her rhetorical question caused a very negative reaction from the prince, who silently glared at the accused. Veronica Hillsdale declared in front of everyone present that she had simply fallen in love with the prince with all her heart, and he had betrayed her. People whispered. They thought she was crazy. Even the count did not come to his own daughter's trial because he was ashamed of her. The Chief Justice sighed wearily and ordered Hillsdale to be removed from the courtroom. Veronica addressed her lover one last time, wishing him happiness. The prince was taken aback by this sudden wish and did not know what to answer. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes as the court knights took her by the arms and led her away. But pulling herself together, Veronica declared to herself, finishing the phrase she said to the prince, that she would be even happier than him. The knights brought the girl to the dungeon and unceremoniously pushed her inside. She fell powerlessly onto the cold floor. As soon as the doors were locked, she stood up as if nothing had happened, adjusting her hair. Smiling slyly, she asked the second person, who was hiding in the room, if he liked Veronica's acting. The older man looked at her sullenly, with his gray eyes from under his brows, but said that it was inimitable. Veronica extended her hand towards him and said that the terms of the contract were now fulfilled. This meant it was time to pay. The man was her client. He was the count people were talking about. Only Veronica was only pretending to be his daughter. The end of the contract meant that Veronica Hillsdale no longer existed. In fact, the girl's name is Lesley, and she is an ordinary commoner, and she has no idea who her real father is. Lesley's mother sold her because of debts when the girl was 10 years old. Then she found herself on the estate of a stately red-haired lady who bought the child from the mother. When the woman asked what Lesley could do, the girl did not answer. Then her mistress took the girl's face in her hand, saying that she was quite beautiful and that this would help her in the future. She replied that she was smart and learned quickly. The lady was very confused by the girl's self-confidence. Lesley asked to consider a different use for it than the one the woman had originally thought of. The girl was persistent and said not to treat her as a living commodity. The redhead chuckled and asked if Lesley knew what they were doing to say such a thing. The woman said mysteriously that every crime requires a witness. That's why sometimes special actors are hired. The lady said that in the future, Lesley could very well become one of them, so she would teach her. Each role had to be played perfectly, whether it was the role of an heiress who was believed to be dead, or a maid. Through hard work, Lesley's acting skills reached perfection, and she began working for the red-haired lady. Among her colleagues, there were many mercenaries and, so to speak, cleanup workers, but actors were always especially popular. One day the lady received a very strange order, and she told Lesley about it. The customer needed a girl who could play the role of his daughter for several years. This surprised her very much. Lesley asked again if the client really wanted her to become his daughter for a while. What surprised her even more was that the reward for this order was equal to her salary for 10 years. The lady smiled sarcastically and noted that, thanks to this tempting offer, Lesley would be able to pay off his mother's debt. It was really amazing because paying off the debt meant that Lesley would be free, so she agreed. For 6 years, she had to help the prince and make him a worthy heir. During this time, the client, who was supposedly Lesley's father, was supposed to find an aristocrat who would become the young man's bride. Everyone in the country had to know Veronica, that is, the very ideal image of Lesley. Even though her entry into high society was delayed due to illness, Veronica conquered everyone. At her first appearance, the prince was indescribably charmed by the girl and hastened to get acquainted, inviting her to dance. Veronica managed to quickly make the prince fall in love with her. She swore her love to him and promised to make him king. By the time the prince fell under Veronica's spell, the customer had just found a suitable contender for the prince's heart. Veronica's pseudo-father found a sweet, innocent girl who was perfect for the prince. The actress tried her best to pretend that she was competing with her rival, and, as expected, the prince did not choose Veronica. According to the script, Veronica, blinded by jealousy, was supposed to poison her competitor. Of course, according to plan, the poisoning failed, and everyone's favorite became a treacherous villain in the eyes of the people. Then Veronica was sentenced to death, and the 6-year contract was over. The plan had worked. Lesley thought that the story was over, so she returned to the lady's estate with good news. The woman was glad to see her ward, but said that she had created a whole sea of trouble for her. The girl, blinded by success, assured her mentor that everything went as planned. However, the lady hastened to disappoint her and handed a small piece of paper to the younger one, who did not understand anything. Lesley unfolded the sheet, and it turned out to be a wanted poster. Now she was in great danger. The lady dispassionately told the girl that she had been betrayed, and that it had been done by none other than the client himself, the pseudo-father of Lesley. The girl literally boiled with rage, not believing her eyes. She had no idea that everything would turn out like this. Lesley decided to go through all the possible reasons why this could have happened to her. Perhaps she made a mistake somewhere or got carried away, thereby interfering with the count's plans. According to the count's plan, the prince was supposed to climb to the very top. She helped him do this, and everything was fine. The customer, as he wanted, found the ideal bride for the heir. And then, acting according to the script, the villain Veronica appeared in an attempt to get the prince at any cost. This would create the perfect love story where everyone would win. At least that's how it was intended. The count's plan would have worked perfectly, and Lesley would have paid off her debts. And after a successful performance, the girl would go to a place where no one knows her. Then she would have lived a wonderful life, and this would truly be a happy ending for her. Lesley crumpled up the wanted poster and threw it away, angry that she had spent so much time and nothing had happened. The lady suggested that her charge had gotten too comfortable in her role, and this could have frightened the count. At the same time, she said that she could now turn in Lesley, for which she would receive a huge reward. Lesley asked if she would get back the money she had earned over the years. She hoped that the lady would not throw her out on the street. The woman looked at the younger girl with a cold-blooded gaze and explained that she was primarily concerned about her own safety. The lady admitted that Lesley was her favorite, so she allows the girl to escape. The best option is to run to the port and save yourself, hiding your identity from everyone. The mentor helped the actress disguise herself by changing her hair color with magic. Lesley ran towards the port. Suddenly, 2 young guys armed with knives ran out of the gateway and started chasing the fleeing girl. Despite the fact that Lesley tried not to attract attention to herself and changed her hair color, the boys still recognized her. The pursuers shouted after Lesley that she was going to die anyway, so they wanted to at least make money off of her. The girl ran to the port, and her head was occupied only with thoughts about the count's betrayal. Lesley had nowhere to run, and, standing on the edge of the pier, She was one step away from giving up. The guys lagged far behind her, and the actress had only a moment to figure out how to proceed. The girl's willpower and desire for freedom were much stronger than the fear of death, so she could not give up. One of the pursuers, out of breath, shouted at Lesley, asking her to come back and not do anything stupid. It was at this very moment, very inopportunely for the young men, that it began to rain. But this could have played into the fugitives' hands. The guys almost caught up with the runaway girl, but the rain was really hindering them in this matter, which made them very angry. The elusive shadow of Lesley, which had flickered before them, had disappeared. There was not a soul on the pier. The young men decided that the actress had gone crazy and jumped into the water, but she was hiding below, clinging to the side of a random ship. She had to stand like that until the guys left, having finally lost hope of catching her. The rain stopped. While escaping, Lesley dropped all her things into the water. Now she definitely lost everything she had. From that moment on, the entire country considered her a criminal who had betrayed her homeland. She was driven into a corner. Lesley didn't have much of a choice of escape routes, so he had to climb up the side of the ship. The girl sincerely hoped that she had ended up on the very ship that her mistress had told her about. She climbed onto the deck, praying that no one would notice her. But she was unlucky again. One guy noticed her. Returning to the beginning, this was the cause of the commotion on the ship. All the people rushed to look for the uninvited guest. The girl hid in a panic in the nearest dark room, peeping through a crack at everything that was happening. She was on a ship, which meant she had nowhere to escape to, so she was very afraid of her own fate. And while her subjects were desperately trying to find her, Lesley was discovered by Prince Khalid, to whom the ship belonged. Lesley remembered meeting the prince 2 years ago. The count warned her about the arrival of a delegation from the kingdom of Iran. The maid was just tightening Lesley's corset. She was preparing for the visit her client had sent her to. Having finished getting ready, Lesley dismissed the maids and went to talk to the count before this event. The customer gave her various instructions, but the main one was to pay more attention to Prince Khalid. Lesley proudly replied that she had had enough of errands. The count demanded too much, but the actress never let him down. The man wanted to explain why he was asking her to be nice to the prince, but she already understood everything. Lesley knew he needed to improve trade relations with the West, so it would be foolish to miss such an opportunity. The count noted her insight, but he warned her to be careful, because one should not underestimate the enemy. At the reception, people did nothing but gossip about Khalid. They said that his entire ship was filled with gold. The aristocrat told her friend about the prince, praising him and his possessions in every possible way. She said that the prince's delegation consisted of more than 100 people, and they brought an immeasurable amount of treasures. The woman was amazed by the heir's wealth, but her friend was more interested in learning about the prince himself. She hesitated, saying that it was impossible to describe him in words. And at that moment, the man pointed to the prince who had appeared. The mere appearance of Prince Khalid was enough to knock one senseless, and that day he was, as always, simply magnificent. Her light, silky locks were neatly styled, her skin had a tanned hue, and her warm eyes seemed filled with gold. All the girls were simply crazy about the handsome young prince of the Iron Empire. Lesley, who was playing the role of Veronica at the time, stood mysteriously in the corner, looking at him. She was confident and determined to get along with the prince, since that was what her pseudo-father needed. But almost the first thing that Lesley said to the prince when they met was that she looked like a puppy. He said she looked so happy, like she was wagging her metaphorical tail like a puppy. That time, the meeting had not been a success at all, so she was clearly not happy that she had mistakenly ended up on Khalid's ship. The prince felt superior to her at the moment. He immediately recognized his old acquaintance, despite the disguise. He wanted to know why she was there, but the tense atmosphere had heightened their emotions. Khalid carried her to the bedroom. At the most inopportune moment, the door to the prince's chambers opened, and Khalid's advisor walked in, unsuspecting. Noticing that the prince was not alone in the room, the advisor became embarrassed and confused, as did the 2 other subjects standing nearby. Prince Khalid was just about to kiss his old acquaintance, satisfying his long-standing desire to do so. The advisor, whose name was Simon, closed the door and muttered shyly that perhaps they could be happy for the prince. One of the subjects, turning to Simon, announced that the fugitive had nevertheless escaped from them. Mr. Simon said that if anyone noticed the girl, they should immediately throw her off the ship. The advisor decided that he would check on the prince a little later. It was better not to go into the chambers now, but to concentrate on the search. Suddenly, the doors opened again, and Khalid came out to talk to his advisor. Mr. Simon bowed respectfully before the heir, greeting him, and showed that he was listening attentively to His Highness. Khalid ordered him to stop searching, stating that there were no strangers on the ship, which greatly surprised Simon. The blonde gave the order to prepare for departure and left Simon in charge to oversee everything. Returning to the girl, Khalid leaned against the wall, smiling sarcastically. He said that she had hit him unfairly, remaining vigilant despite what had recently happened between them. Lesley looked at him with distrust. Khalid Silid Hardaman, crown prince of the Irene Empire, came to Weldon, where the girl lived, on trade matters. The actress didn't want to admit it, but the fact that she ended up on Prince Khalid's ship was even better for her. Shedding dramatic tears, Lesley sadly said that she had the wrong ship and asked Khalid to let her go. The prince was quite skeptical about her game, and the girl did not expect such a reaction from him at all. The prince mockingly asked why she was so scared then, wanted to run away, and even hit him. He showed her the wanted poster and said that he knew the girl was a criminal. Lesley was confused and disappointed. How did he manage to recognize her through the disguise? Calling her Veronica Hillsteel, Khalid told her not to even think about telling him a sad story to justify herself. The prince reminded Lesley that they knew each other well enough that their first meeting would be difficult to forget. The boy called her a puppy, but not out of bad intentions. The prince simply found her excited state cute, but the girl interpreted it differently, being outraged by Khalid calling her a dog. The prince of her kingdom, who was in love with Lesley, noticed their conversation and turned around. The actress kindly waved to her lover, but Khalid was not happy with the attention directed at them. Until this moment, Lesley had never deviated from the plan, but she simply could not ignore such an insult. Prince Khalid apologized, saying that he was not yet familiar with their language and customs. He wanted to emphasize her virtues. The girl smiled at him coldly and feignedly, saying that his knowledge of their language was impressive. She approached him and added, quite unkindly, that she advised him to learn to read people. Noticing the growing tension between the two, Lesley's lover hastened to calm her down, but she did not calm down. In the same icy tone, she said that she had not wanted to attract Khalid's attention at all, and he flinched. Suddenly, both participants in the conflict were distracted by a gentle female voice, drawing the attention of the disputants to itself. The very girl whom the count had chosen as a wife for the prince came to the rescue. The girl arrived just in time and saved the situation, calming down those present. Thanks to her, both sides were able to reach an agreement, and the heirs of both kingdoms shook hands. Oddly enough, the count even praised Lesley for her work and told her to continue to treat Khalid with hostility. Lesley's ill will was meant to help the prince's future bride to become closer to Khalid, by contrast. Lesley knew it wouldn't be difficult, since she hadn't made the best first impression. From that moment on, the actress became even more immersed in the role, constantly arguing with the prince over any reason. One time, she told him that Prince Khalid looked like a barbarian, and wasn't he ashamed to appear at a banquet half naked? She would never have said such stupid things to him if she had known that she would have to face him like this in the future. Khalid noticed that Lesley was wearing sparkling earrings, which were a magical artifact that provided camouflage. He reached out and took her off them without a second's hesitation, not allowing the girl to stop him. Lesley turned away from him, still wondering in her head how the blonde had figured it out and managed to notice them. The guy carefully but confidently took his old acquaintance by the chin, turning her face back to him. The spell was broken, and she was back to her true form. She had worked so hard to disguise herself. How could he have found her out? Khalid now asked her to answer honestly who the girl considered herself to be. Was she his night guest or a criminal? Lesley only answered the question evasively with a question, asking what the prince himself thought about it. Prince Khalid stood up, putting on his robe, and said that in his eyes the girl was a faithful dog, obeying her master. He guessed that Daniel Lappin Weatherlin must have gotten her into all this. The actress was stunned by Khalid's answer, because she did not expect to hear from him about the Prince of Weldon, her kingdom. The heir's guess surprised her very much. The girl had no idea that he was thinking in that direction. It turned out that Khalid believed that Lesley had become a criminal and had climbed onto his ship because of the first prince. The guy added that she could easily go to the depths of hell if Prince Daniel so desired. Well, on the other hand, such a reaction was quite expected for Lesley. Khalid leaned towards the girl's face and asked if she was really ready to do this for Daniel. Lesley quickly came up with a way to lie to Irina's heir and told him that she was on the ship of her own free will. Khalid asked her not to deny his words. He saw very well what had been happening lately. The girl asked him what role he liked: a guest, a stowaway, a loyal puppy, or a notorious villain. Lesley said he could choose any of the roles and she would play it. The blonde chuckled and asked if it was all just a game. He took a sip of wine from a golden goblet and handed it to the actress. Khalid asked if her love for Daniel was fake. The girl accepted the glass and confirmed that a love story with a prince was one of her client's wishes. Khalid was surprised that she would go so far just to please a client. Lesley said it was worth it as long as she got paid accordingly. The prince took a sip from the second golden goblet, which he took for himself. The guy was mysteriously telling Lesley about the city of Surayev in the east, and she was listening, not understanding what he was getting at. The young man said that there were 3 rooms in the city. The first was filled with gold, the second with silver, and the third with precious stones. When he said that the girl could choose anyone, she realized that he wanted to order it. Khalid said that since she had tried the role of a villain, she could now try playing a loving wife. He gently took her chin, saying that she would play the role of his bride, with whom he fell in love at first sight. The heir smiled tenderly and added that everyone who saw them should believe in the sincerity of their feelings. But before making a deal, Khalid would still like to find out from Lesley who she really is. He came close to her face and asked why it was so difficult for her to answer, why she continued to evade the answer. The prince took the glass from her hands and said that he liked what she had done earlier. He came very close to her, putting the golden goblet aside. Pulling the girl towards him, the golden-haired man reminded her that just recently, while also in his arms, she kissed him. He whispered to her lips that she had assured him that she could play any role. The girl lowered her eyes in embarrassment, not looking at the prince, who sincerely expected her to respond. Lesley said she would accept his commission. She would, of course, play his bride. Khalid gently took her hand in his and touched her hand with his lips, leaving a soft kiss. He said that they were sailing away. The subjects were already bustling about on deck at this time, preparing the ship for departure. They were returning to the Empire. The red-haired boy spoke to the prince's advisor and told him that the decision to leave was made unexpectedly. Simon replied that there was simply no reason to wait any longer. The prince had found the bride he had been looking for a long time. The young man smiled, looking calmly at the night sky. He agreed that they had indeed done everything they wanted. The ship set sail, and the night city slowly began to move away from them, losing its clear outlines. Simon was worried that they never found the boy's younger sister, but he said everything was fine. The red-haired man changed the subject and said that what was more important was that they would now have a crown princess. Suddenly, Simon said that he had one more piece of news, which the young man had not expected at all. Simon said that Lana had caught a spy, which surprised the guy. Had he been following them since they left Iran? The advisor said that this was true, but what's more, she was trying to seduce the prince. Now this girl was imprisoned in a dungeon cell on the ship. Simon noticed that Khalid was not interested in women anyway, and the spy had chosen the most terrible way to seduce him. Night quickly gave way to morning, bringing with it bright rays of sunshine. Things were going smoothly, and this made Lesley wary. She couldn't understand why all her subjects treated her so well, even though she hadn't even signed the contract yet. As she sat down to breakfast, she found herself worrying that she might find poison in her food. But she quickly realized that everything was okay once she tried the dishes served to her and realized that the food was very tasty. This relaxed her a little, but she knew that she still couldn't let her guard down. She thought it was strange that the ship decided to set sail just as she was about to board. Besides, there had to be a reason why 2 guys started following her as soon as she stepped outside. Why did Khalid take such a risk and set out on a journey without warning anyone from the Empire? All these factors, together with the prince's overly considerate attitude, must have had their effect. Khalid entered the room and casually asked if Lesley was enjoying the food served. The girl put another piece in her mouth and answered with an important look that the breakfast was quite good. The actress invited the prince to join the meal, as they had something to discuss together. The girl said she knew Khalid was hiding something, and she wanted to know what before signing the contract. The blonde replied that he had nothing to hide, so she shouldn't worry about it. He twirled a golden goblet in his hand and said that he had no hidden intentions, but for now he had only told her part of it. This statement noticeably tensed the girl, and she waited warily for him to explain. Khalid said that from the very beginning, his target was Lesley. The guy didn't intend to swim away so quickly, but what he was aiming for came to him on its own. He licked his lips contentedly and said that when he met Lesley on the ship, he no longer had any doubts. The girl did not share the prince's relaxed state and reached for the knife. The situation became clear to her. She voiced her arguments and asked if it was true that he had been dealing with actors from the very beginning. The guy was confused by Lesley's hostility, and he did not understand what she was unhappy about. The girl took a big sip of wine. She realized for herself that the prince wanted to get her from the very beginning. That is why he immediately recognized her and treated her without hostility and entrusted her with the task without even checking her abilities. Lesley said that it turns out the prince recognized her from the very beginning and just wanted her to confess everything herself. Khalid didn't really understand what Lesley was talking about, and on the contrary, asked how he could recognize her, assuring her that she was wrong. She slammed her fist on the table and said again that the prince had known for sure from the very beginning about both the poison and the magic item. Among the children of Fiore, that is, the acting organization, she was the only one who received a magical item from Madame. The magic earrings were a secret that only Madame and Lesley herself knew about. Khalid's identification meant that Madame had sold her, since Lesley could no longer be used in Weldon. She realized that Khalid's overprotectiveness could not be trusted, so she hid the knife behind her back and decided to check something. Lesley hung her head in resignation and said that she had previously thought that Madame was protecting her, but it turned out otherwise. Harry Rena tilted his head in confusion, still trying to comprehend Lesley's words, spoken out of context. The girl pulled herself together and asked how much money he spent on her. Khalid calmly replied that he had offered as much money as was needed. Lesley snapped back that it was probably more than necessary. The prince was damn rich, so it wasn't surprising. The girl knew that she had left for the port long before the appointed time, but even so, she could not escape pursuit. It turns out that it was the Madame's acting guys who deliberately drove her into a corner, leading her to the ship. The prince cleared his throat and noticed that the atmosphere between them seemed to have changed slightly. Lesley was becoming increasingly irritated by Khalid's calmness and the careful way he chose his words. He sincerely did not understand why the girl suddenly got so worked up, and Lesley was angry that she had been so brazenly deceived. The blonde tiredly said that they had communicated normally before, so why be so dramatic? Now the girl was surprised that the prince was not even trying to justify himself or smooth things over. She stood up slowly and left the table. She assumed that perhaps the prince would be easy to control. A veteran like her sees through people. The prince watched the girl's actions closely. Lesley walked up to Khalid and gently pulled him towards her, placing her hand on his cheek. The girl kissed him tenderly, and the blonde was not at all against it, not resisting at all. She noted the prince's immediate reaction and excitement, which meant that he liked Lesley as a woman. She initially did this to understand Khalid's attitude towards her, but she couldn't help but notice that she liked it too. Both young people's hearts were pounding loudly when they finally pulled away, breaking the kiss. Lesley concluded that he wanted her one way or another. Khalid's feelings for her were not just part of a plan. She carefully placed the knife on the table and decided that since the prince liked her, she could use it for her own purposes. Khalida was confused by this sudden kiss and asked what the girl wanted to tell him and why she did it. Lesley replied that it didn't mean anything. She did it to get off the subject. The blonde smiled, amused by this grumpy answer. The girl suggested going back to discussing their contract. She shouldn't have given in to her emotions. Lesley reminded them that they needed to sign an employment contract and discuss some formalities. She said with a sly smile that from now on they were in the same boat. Prince Khalid took a hot bath, while discussing the recent events with his advisor. Simone was outraged that Khalid signed the contract because choosing the crown princess is a big responsibility. In the future, Lesley and the prince will have to rule Sareb and protect the people and the peaceful life in Arena. Simon, as Khalid's right hand, was worried about him and asked what the heir would do with the girl when the contract expired. Khalid thought for a moment and replied that he would not be able to let her go even after the deal was completed. The prince also asked Simon to speak more quietly because the actress might hear them, but Simon assured her that she did not know their language. Khalid explained that he had to agree to a contract with the girl because he had no other choice. The boy climbed out of the water and reached for a towel to wrap around his hips. Khalid said that Lesley is simply an actress who can play any role, and the image of Veronica Hillsdale was one of them. Simon was puzzled. He found this kind of work, and their deal in general, strange, but he did not contradict the prince. He asked Khalid why he had agreed to the contract in the first place. The guy explained that he wanted to know the real her, so the contract would help with that. The advisor cried out indignantly again, not fully understanding the logic of Arena's heir's decisions. Khalid reminded the man that he loved and appreciated his honesty very much. Simon was extremely embarrassed by the praise, so he changed the subject. He asked Khalid to tell him about the crown princess. Khalid said there was one more hidden detail, and he hoped Simon could come up with a solution to the problem. Because of the ban, Khalid cannot speak openly about this, but he can share the secret with his advisor. It turns out that Lesley and Khalid met 10 years ago as children and made a promise to each other. Lesley, taking advantage of the brief moment of solitude, considered whether she had done the right thing in agreeing to this job. The girl looked at the huge flag of Arena, which decorated the wall of the cabin. There was doubt and fear inside her about how far Khalid's kingdom was from her home, but she could no longer retreat. The endless sea carried the ship further and further, heading for sunny Iron. In her homeland she was a criminal, and Prince Daniel, having learned of her escape, will not let her get away with it. Since crossing the sea was dangerous, Iron was a place that was difficult to get to, so Lesley would be safe there. The prince was furious at her escape because he still did not know the full story, and so he forced his subjects to search everything. The count, who still did not betray the girl, was worried about the search for the missing Lesley because it ruined his plans too. He was outraged that Lesley could even run away without his permission, since this violated their contract and put him at risk. A new client came to the madam who was Lesley's mentor, but she replied that she was not accepting offers yet. But instead, the lady could have provided the girl with something else, something more interesting. An unknown man was watching them from the corner of the room, hiding behind his hat. The stranger, standing in the shadows, looked at the women with a cold, mysterious gaze. The sun was already at its zenith, and the pleasant weather and calm sea surface facilitated the ship's journey to Iran. Lesley decided for herself that she had done the right thing. In the new kingdom, she would finally be able to live a normal life. The actress suddenly stopped in the middle of the cabin. A sudden thought came to her mind. Why, of all the roles, the bride? But then she remembered the previous night and her kiss with Khalid, which embarrassed her greatly. And while she was walking around the room, busy with thoughts, a tiger's tail flashed in the corner, which the girl did not notice. Meanwhile, Simon suggested that Khalid tell Lesley everything in 3 days, when they reached neutral waters. Khalid said that if he tells her what happened 10 years ago, she will hate him, thinking that he is meddling in her past. The prince really wanted to tell her that they had once known each other, but he did not want to ruin their relationship. Simon began to try to figure out what to do next and what to do with this information. The guy stated decisively that he would have to seduce her. The advisor was taken aback by the surprise. Khalid wanted to do this so that Lesley would want to stay with him even after the end of the contract. The advisor was shocked. He did not understand how the prince could use such vulgar language. Khalid knew that winning Lesley's heart would not be easy even for him. She was not an ordinary girl. The guy told Simone to come up with a way to make the actress fall in love with Khalid. Simon stood there in bewilderment at these words, because he had no idea how to do this. Khalid waved his hand carelessly, reminding him that it was his job to help him in whatever it took. The two of them went to the table to quench their thirst, where Simon said that he was not good enough at love affairs to help. It was the first time Simon had seen Khalid so worried, and it made him even more confused. Suddenly, the boy asked his advisor how it would be better for him to walk in front of Lesley, dressed or naked. This question made Simon choke on the drink he had just been drinking. The confused advisor cried out that the prince was possessed by a demon. He told him not to act rashly. Khalid asked if he thought this would scare off the crown princess. The man only answered evasively that he was not sure, but most likely yes. The blonde grumbled and asked why give advice if he himself wasn't completely sure. The boy frowned and said that Lesley had been through a lot. He would like to erase her sad past if he could. Simon reassured him, saying that there was no point in clinging to the past. They had a future that they would build together. He agreed and said that even if she didn't remember their promise to each other and never would, he had a chance. The prince swore that he would never leave her again. Time was on his side. Khalid will try to do everything to ensure that Lesley enjoys all the delights of life, be it food, clothes, or jewelry. At the same time, the hold remained just as gloomy and frightening, illuminated only by a few dim lamps. The prisoner who was there smiled with a mad grin, saying that she would pierce the lonely heart of the prince. After some time, Lesley, tired by the recent events, accidentally dozed off while waiting for Khalid to return. She was mumbling in her sleep, begging someone not to touch her. Apparently, the girl was dreaming of something very unpleasant. Suddenly, she jumped up, waking up in a cold sweat and screaming in horror. She didn't even notice how she fell asleep, so she tried to come to her senses and move away from the frightening dream. There was a gentle knock on the door, and this interrupted her restless thoughts about what she had dreamed. The girl opened the door, thinking that the prince had finally returned, and grumbled discontentedly, asking why she was knocking like that. But instantly realizing that it was not he who had come to see her, Lesley slammed the door in surprise. Having calmed down a little, she looked out the doorway again, and the newcomer said that the prince had ordered him to guard the girl. A young man with copper-red hair stood behind the door. He specified that he was to guard her while Khalid took a bath. The guy's name was Sun. Lesley thought that this was a good chance to gather more information. She asked San for permission to ask him a few questions, and he happily agreed to answer any of her questions. First, she asked what the status of women was in Irene, compared to Whedon. The warrior replied that before the wedding, they choose whose surname the family will carry. And very often, women are the head of the family. Lesley asked if this meant that the princess would be entrusted with state affairs and diplomatic relations. The redhead replied that he wasn't sure. Lesley quipped that the guy had promised to answer any question, which confused him. After their conversation, after some time, Prince Khaled returned and allowed Sanu to leave. Lesley, who was sitting and doing some paperwork, immediately greeted the guy happily. Khalid did not expect such a reaction from her and asked if she was expecting him. The actress called him over and said indifferently that they needed to finish their contract. The young man had hoped for a different answer, so the girl's impenetrability upset him, although he tried not to show it. She still noticed the change in his face and asked what was the matter, but he ignored her question. The blonde took the piece of paper with the contract that she was handing him and began to read it. Lesley looked at the prince with concern, trying to understand his reaction. She hoped that contracts were being made in Arena too. Khalid began reading some of the clauses in the contract out loud. First, the actor had to perform his role faithfully. Specifically, in their case, this meant the role of a foreign bride with whom the prince fell in love at first sight. Secondly, the prince had to protect her. Thirdly, he had to provide her with all the information and support she needed. Fourth, after the contract is completed, he must reward her with 10 million Weldon gold. Fifth, once the terms of the contract are fulfilled, the client should not look for a contractor. This point worried Khalid. Lesley interrupted him and said that she wanted to discuss how long she would have to fulfill the role of the prince's bride. He, sitting down opposite, said that first he wanted to know why there was no mention of what to do if it failed. The girl confidently answered that this was because this would definitely not happen. She was completely confident in her abilities. Khalid glared at her. He said nothing, but his look made it clear that he was not satisfied with her excuse. The actress sighed and said that she would add that point, all right. In fact, she hoped Khalid wouldn't notice. She added the sixth point. It stated that if she failed, she would do whatever the prince wanted. The prince was pleased with this condition, and many thoughts about such a scenario immediately appeared in his head. The girl hoped that the contract would last no more than 2 years, otherwise problems might arise, as with the role of Veronica. Khalid noted out loud that it seemed like the previous contract had taken a heavy toll on her. Lesley didn't answer, but said that if they dragged it out for more than 2 years, people would become suspicious. Khalid asked her why she thought so. She replied that it was because they would not have a child. This confused the prince. His cheeks flushed, and he was confused. But when the girl asked him what was wrong, he brushed it off, saying that everything was fine. She said that since she was his fiancée, she understood that they would have to sleep. This made Khalid cough even more. She concluded her remarks by stating that she had no intention of engaging in unprotected sex, and asked if Khalid was listening to her. The guy suddenly picked her up in his arms and announced that the contract was then signed. He pushed her onto the bed and said that from that moment on, he had the right to do whatever he wanted. The rest of the evening passed quietly. They signed the contract, Lesley went to sleep and rest, and Khalid watched the girl. The guy sat on the edge of her bed and carefully sorted through the sleeping woman's dark curls. He was surprised at how quickly the actress fell asleep. He didn't even have time to do anything. Lesley was having another nightmare, muttering something unintelligible and frowning. Khalid carefully pulled the blanket higher over her. She was again asking someone in her sleep to stop. The prince was worried about his beloved girl's sleep and tenderly hugged her, kissing her temple before leaving her alone in the room. The night passed unnoticed, and the morning was sunny again. The copper-haired girl was kneeling before Simon. The girl begged the advisor to let her see their future crown princess. Her name was Lana. She was San's twin sister. Simon didn't agree at all. Lana is the commander of the border patrol, but she behaved like a child, begging on her knees. The man firmly told her one last time that he could not allow her to do this now. The girl asked angrily and disappointedly about the reason for his stubbornness on this matter. Her brother, noticing Lana's capricious behavior, approached them and also tried to calm his sister down. Her other subjects were no longer surprised by her antics, but they said that, despite her behavior, she had no equal in battle. Lana is unstoppable during the attack on the Sarai. With her abilities, she was able to gain the prince's trust. In fact, all the subjects would like to meet the princess. There were rumors that her beauty had no equal. The unrelenting Lana was pulled away from the advisor, and San apologized for his sister. The man said it was okay. They all remembered her achievements, but what could she do since she had such a character? The redhead said that they should still behave appropriately, since they had earned the attention of the prince, even though they themselves were from a poor village. Simon said that the twins are talented warriors who have earned trust. You must always hold your head high. San was very flattered by these words and grateful to the advisor for his understanding and support. Meanwhile, Lesley had already woken up, and Khalid immediately came to her to check if everything was okay. Feeling a little awkward, he asked the crown princess if she had enjoyed the bath. The girl smiled radiantly, thanked him, and said that the bath was divine. She clarified that after everything that happened, it was just wonderful. The guy's attention was drawn to the bracelets he gave to Lesley. She put them all on her hands at once. Khalid said he was glad that Lesley enjoyed the bath, but his thoughts were obviously occupied with something else. The actress suddenly remembered that the maids had been behaving strangely while she was taking a bath. At first, they calmly looked after her, helping her wash her hair and tidy herself up. They smiled at her sincerely and seemed happy to take care of her. But at some point, their friendliness seemed suspicious to Lesley. They were too joyful. However, the dark-haired girl was glad of their help, so she kindly thanked them for their work and attention. Her kindness only further kindled the maid's exalted mood, and they began to chat animatedly. The girls were discussing how beautiful and good their princess was. But Lesley didn't know their language well, so she didn't understand anything. Akrisa told Khalid that they were so caring about her, as if they were not at all surprised by the appearance of the crown princess. The blonde man said that he was the one who ordered them to take care of her, and hoped that everything went well. The young man changed the subject and suddenly pulled the girl towards him, apologizing for not being able to finish what he started at night. He leaned towards her to kiss her and suggested that they continue where they left off. Lesley reminded him that she wasn't ready for something like that until they discussed a few more things. But Khalid, although he was not intrusive, firmly said that it seemed to him that the girl, on the contrary, was already ready. She was surprised by such persistence, and Lesley asked, "What do you mean?" He was almost pressing his lips to hers when the princess stopped him, asking him not to do it. The prince obeyed, but pointed out that they were alone in a small room, and he could not hold back for so long. She listened to him attentively until she noticed something strange and moving at the other end of the room. An orange and black striped tiger tail appeared from behind the sofa, wagging elegantly. The heir turned in the direction his beloved was pointing and asked if this was really the first time she saw Teru. A fairly large tiger entered the room with an important air and lay down on a colorful bed on the floor that belonged to him. Khalid explained that, unlike Weldon, Irina still had magic. Every resident had a small piece of it. Those who possessed particularly strong magic could give it shape. As a rule, people gave magic the form of animals, and this is how guardian spirits were born. Terra. Normally, no one could support Teru outside the Empire, but Khalid is the only one who can do it. Khalid told Lesley not to be afraid. The ethereal beast would not harm her. He approached the actress and suggested that she continue. In fact, the girl wanted to continue. The prince's hugs, gentle touches, and passionate kisses were pleasant to her, but the girl had never gone further than kissing before, so she was afraid. Madame taught that love is stupidity. She and the mysterious gentleman taught their actors that only the mission was important, that one must always control one's emotions. Lesley made excuses, saying she would not tolerate unprotected sex. Khalid replied that he had taken care of that. He pointed to the girl's bracelets and said that even one of them was enough to rule out conception. Since the girl put on all the bracelets he had at once, he decided that Lesley was ready to become one with him. At that moment, the actress realized that the maids were squealing with delight and gossiping because they knew what the bracelets were for. Lesley felt very awkward. She couldn't even imagine that an ordinary, at first glance, decoration could be used for such a thing. The young man picked up his beloved in his arms and carried her to bed. Now that they had discussed the issue that was troubling her, his golden eyes expressed sincere desire, but the girl was still not ready. She pulled away from his embrace and said that they needed to add one more clause to the contract. No physical intimacy. An actress is obliged to do whatever she wants, as long as the role requires it, but she is not obliged to be in the role all the time. She reminded that their relationship was just a formality, so she added another clause to the contract. The guy shuddered. A multitude of not the most pleasant emotions were lumped together inside him into one big, unbearable lump of feelings. He folded his arms across his chest and let out a defeated sigh, saying that she could then do whatever she wanted. Pleased that the prince agreed with her, Lesley edited their new rule and told Khalid to sign it. Unexpectedly, the actress also asked whether the prince had already come up with a new name for her. She said she couldn't stay as Veronica, and Khalid replied that he thought she would use her real name. The girl objected that it was too dangerous, and her name should remain a secret. Khalid initially almost said Lesley's real name, but quickly corrected himself and said Neris. He explained that Neris meant sea fairy, and the girl's heart began to beat faster. She liked this option. From then on, Lesley had to go by the name Neris for the entire time she played the prince's bride, Irina. Meanwhile, Simon and San went down into the hold to check on the captive. San said that she had finally calmed down. Tara had scared the prisoner so much that she had toned down her ardor and had not caused any more trouble for now. Simon noticed that the captive had been hiding from them for too long, which meant she was using concealment magic. San replied that they didn't know this for sure yet, as well as the nature of her magic. The girl's capture happened too quickly. Looking at her lying helplessly on the cold floor, the advisor noticed that she had completely lost hope. San promised to personally interrogate the girl later, but the interlocutor replied that in any case, upon arrival in the Empire, she would be finished. According to the advisor, the red-haired man guessed that they wanted to extract magic from the prisoner, and this fact horrified her. The guy looked contemptuously at the enraged girl and said that extracting magic was a punishment even worse than death. Simon locked the cell in which the girl was located, intending to leave the dungeon. The advisor asked the warrior, in a friendly manner, how Lana was doing. San replied that his sister was as active as ever. The young men walked away from the hold, and the guards who remained there bowed politely to them. San told Simon that Lana had recently even beaten him and this finally made the advisor understand why he was covered in bruises. On the way, the guys discussed the fact that the ship would soon be approaching the border, which meant that security should be strengthened. The prisoner clutched at the wooden bars of the dungeon in despair. Dark magic, expressed in lilac smoke, flowed from the girl in all directions. But no matter how hard she tried, there was no chance of escape, although something temptingly flashed in the corner of the cell. Another day came to an end, taking with it the past events and the night mistress of the sky. The moon rose to her post. Simon came to the prince and princess's chambers to meet Lesley, who was now called Neris. The advisor apologized for his late visit, but the girl assured him that everything was fine. Moreover, they had already met. In fact, up until this point, they had only crossed paths when Simon saw her kiss Khalid. Before the advisor could get lost in his thoughts, Neris thanked the young man for his hard work. She hoped to get along with him. The unexpected praise flattered Simon very much, and he began to babble in confusion that he was only too happy to try. Khalid quickly interrupted the emotional advisor, asking him to get down to the original purpose of the visit. Quickly pulling himself together, the guy pulled a mask of exceptional calmness onto his face and obeyed. The prince said that Neris was sleeping poorly, so Simon, having received permission from the girl, was going to examine her. The advisor approached the princess and began to examine her face, unceremoniously pulling down her eyelids with his fingers. He assumed that the girl had no health problems, but he was worried that the princess was so petite. Neris rubbed her eye, which was slightly sore after the examination, and was surprised that the prince's right hand was also a doctor. Khalid said that he would take care of the girl's nutrition, and in response to his concerns, Simon replied that there were no other problems. The prince breathed a sigh of relief when the advisor confirmed that the princess appeared to be in perfect health. Neris noted to herself that the advisor seemed quite experienced. It was worth getting closer to him. It could be useful. Khalid warned that he needed to go away and check something, so he asked Simon to keep an eye on the princess. Having almost left the cabin, the fair-haired man turned around and asked his subject not to blurt out anything unnecessary. As soon as the prince was out of sight, Neris asked the advisor for permission to ask one question. The girl asked if Khalid had said anything about her in his presence. Simon replied that the prince said that Neris was his bride, the ruler of Surayev, and in the future, the ruler of Iran. He didn't say anything else of significance, but he mentioned that the prince had ordered the best dishes to be prepared for the girl. The advisor apologized for his behavior and asked if the princess had any other questions. Neris admitted that she didn't quite understand why none of her subjects were surprised by her appearance. Simon said the guard she met when she boarded the ship did not remember her face, and no one knew her language. This meant that none of the subjects had any idea what had happened in Weldon. Therefore, they cannot even read the wanted poster to suspect something is wrong. Neris understood that Simon was the only exception because he knew about Veronica, and he most likely knew the Weldon language even better than Khalid. The actress asked Simone if she was against everything that was happening, knowing who she was. The advisor confirmed that he was not against it and would prove his sincerity with actions in the future. Neris thought for a moment, going over in her mind everything the young man had said. She smiled kindly and thanked Simon again, saying that she was already looking forward to being in his care. These words seemed to shoot a sharp arrow into the guy's heart, causing him to become emotional again. When Neris asked, he replied that he was fine and asked if there was anything else he could do to help her. The girl, looking at her hand, remembered another question. She asked if everyone in Arena wore such bracelets. The advisor replied that besides her, only the prince wore the same ones. These bracelets were valuable and were prepared especially for her. Thoughtfully examining the decoration on her wrist, the girl asked if this was really Prince Khalid's treasure. Simon, surprised by her precise statement, confirmed that this was indeed the case. The girl's thoughts darkened. She thought that since there were so many of them, perhaps the prince was planning to use them with others. Since Neris had no more questions, Simon decided to tell her more about the crown prince. Khalid is the heir to the Hartman dynasty, the Iron Empire, the most worthy heir to the throne. He is not only smart, but also talented in martial arts. He has no equal in any discipline. Well, because of his position and beauty, Khalid has no shortage of women. The girl indifferently noted that she had noticed the last fact herself. Simon continued to praise His Highness, noting that he had never been involved in scandalous relationships. The advisor assured her that Khalid had no brides or concubines, but Nerys thought that there must be those with whom he slept. But the girl didn't tell the guy about her guesses, because these were very useless arguments. Nerys said thoughtfully that it turned out that she really knew nothing at all about the prince. She sighed heavily, propping her head up with her palm, and went deep into her thoughts. Her sudden change of mood made Simon worry that he had said something wrong. Nerys wondered what everyone would say about the prince bringing an unknown girl and calling her his bride. Simon said that they were all a little surprised, but they believed in the choice of the crown prince. The girl asked why they believed. Unfortunately, he couldn't tell about the magic because of the ban, so he simply said that she won the prince's heart. Simon reassured the girl by telling her that Khalid was absolutely enchanted by her. And at that moment, the prince returned. He noted that Simon and Nerys got along well, but nevertheless cast a suspicious glance at his subject. Khalid allowed the advisor to leave if he finished talking to the princess. Simon quickly bowed and decided to leave. And the prince's piercing gaze did not allow him to hesitate. Nerys waved goodbye to the boy. She thought the advisor was quiet enough, but it turned out he wasn't. The prince asked if they had a good conversation. The girl replied that everything had indeed been fine until he arrived. The blonde said he could arrange another meeting for them if she wanted, but advised them not to get too close. Nerys sarcastically asked if Khalid was jealous of her, since he was saying such things and was also tense. The young man was outraged by her assumption. How could he, a prince, be jealous of her for some advisor? The girl, deciding not to continue the topic, instead asked if everything was okay. After all, Khalid had left them so quickly. The guy was laconic and simply replied that everything was fine, but the prisoner had escaped. San reported to him that several people were injured, and the guards were unable to cope with the aggressively minded witch. The prince assumed that the escapee was now hiding and healing her wounds. San, visibly agitated, assumed that the girl was going to repeat the attempt on the prince's life. Khalid said the more interesting question was how she managed to escape from her shackles. He was sure she had an accomplice. San insisted that the girl could not be left alive. The safety of the crown prince depended on it. Khalid had no intention of betraying his principles, but he promised to punish the girl when they arrived in Irun. The red-haired man flinched. The prince's words did not calm him down much, but he did not argue anymore. After hearing this news from Khalid, the actress once again asked if His Highness was okay. He just said that everything had already been decided, so the girl had nothing to worry about. And at that very moment, the fair-haired man decided to change the subject, thereby slightly surprising his interlocutor. He pointed to a stack of papers lying next to her and noted that the actress had obviously worked hard. She enthusiastically said that Simon had given her so much useful information that she couldn't help but write it down. Khalid assured the girl that she did not need to try so hard, but she insisted that she had to approach the role responsibly. Who knows? Maybe for her amazing work, a dear client will give her some nice bonus. She reminded the prince that he had promised to give her whatever she wanted for her work. The heir, not at all embarrassed by her reminder, asked directly what the girl wanted then. The sudden question stumped her, and she turned her back to the guy so that he would not see the shadow of sadness on her face. Freedom was her strongest and deepest desire, but she could not tell the prince about it directly. For as long as Nerys could remember, freedom was what she dreamed of most. She couldn't answer the question of what she would do when she finally gained freedom. Surely a life without any responsibilities awaits her, in a place far from Fiore. Pictures of an ideal free life were flashing through her head one after another, but the thought of Prince Khalid accidentally popped up. Concerned by the girl's long, thoughtful silence, the prince asked if she was even listening to him. She bit her lip and mentally scolded herself for giving in to her emotions. The blonde repeated his question about what Nerys wanted most of all. The girl forced a smile onto her lips, trying to look as calm and natural as possible. She said that she only wanted money, and the prince didn't like it at all. He felt that the girl was lying. Meanwhile, Simon and Son were talking on the deck under the night sky. They were talking about how special their princess was. The advisor noted that the purity of her mana was astonishing, and even the color of her eyes was unique. The red-haired boy supported him, saying that the expressive eyes of the crown princess could not be described in words. Simon said that even kind words spoken to her unconsciously carry magic. San was already looking forward to the moment when the girl would show her full potential. The advisor said that their prince had been right in his words from the very beginning. Now the warrior understood why Khalid had insisted so much on going to Weldon. The presence of the princess was equivalent to the presence of a high priest, according to the advisor. San was very surprised by this. Simon involuntarily plunged into his thoughts. The princess could not only be strong, but also capable of purification. The advisor soon came to his senses and apologized to his friend for apparently taking up too much of his time. The guy sent San to finish his rounds and said goodbye, wishing him good night. The advisor looked thoughtfully at the sky, wondering if their princess would be okay. She came on board knowing nothing. The prince would have to remain on good terms with her to explain everything. Immediately after these experiences, the prince came out on deck and said guiltily that he had turned the advisor's fears into reality. Earlier, Khalid, in response to Neris's statement about money, said that he thought she wanted something else. She answered evasively that she didn't need anything else. This upset the guy, because it meant that she didn't need him either. Neris told him to keep in mind that she would work according to the payment, so the prince himself did not interest her. He hastened to remind her that he could give the girl everything she wanted. The actress turned away from him, cold-bloodedly asserting that she was only interested in material resources. Simon was shocked by what he heard. This situation did not fit at all with his and the prince's expectations. The advisor asked if Khalid wanted to seduce the princess. Khalid said that it was true, he wanted to, but there was one thing. The prince's right hand pierced him with stern green eyes. He said that, judging by Khalid, he only made things worse. The prince sighed wearily. He knew it would be difficult, but he had no idea it would be this difficult. Neris sat in the ringing silence, alone in the spacious but empty cabin, thinking about something of her own. She always strove for freedom, but she never thought about what she would do when she got it. Perhaps this happened because everyone had been making decisions for her entire life, not allowing her to take responsibility for herself. Suddenly, a snow-white, wonderful-looking bird flew into the open window, gracefully flapping its white wings. Neris watched the dove dispassionately, as if not at all surprised by its appearance. The bird was the personification of that very unattainable freedom. So the girl again delved into her sad thoughts. The dove sat down on her palm carefully, with unobtrusive interest. As she was thinking about the freedom she desired, Khalid briefly visited her thoughts. The one who gave her the chance to get it. Khalid was the one who looked at her so warmly, who called her name so softly. She opened her palms to make it more comfortable for the bird, who gratefully rubbed his feathers against her hands. Unfortunately, love was not part of their contract with the prince, and the dove, without delay, soon flew away from her. Neris, with a lump in her throat, convinced herself that love was definitely not needed by the heir, who had everything without it. There was only one lonely feather left in her hands, and only it reminded her of the recent visit of the unexpected night guest. Tara entered her room just as unexpectedly, growling lowly and stretching. The terrified actress huddled in a corner of the bed, while Tara calmly washed his face with his tongue. No matter how many times she saw the tiger, she was still just as scared. The tiger padded softly with his large paws across the wooden floor of the cabin. Neris began to scream at him not to move, although the beast was already about to leave the room. While the girl was in hysterics, not understanding how one could live with a wild animal, someone came to her chambers. Her eyes were wet and her hands were shaking, but when she saw Khalid coming, she thought that she was finally saved. The guy entered the cabin and, looking around, asked what was going on. The prince came to the noise coming from the room. Tara looked at Khalid with a bored look, breathing loudly and evenly. The prince noticed that Neris was beginning to get used to the tiger, but she complained that the guy had been gone for too long. He noticed with a smile that the girl seemed to be feeling a little better. She seemed depressed when they were talking, but now she calmed down and asked to say something to the tiger. The prince glared sternly at Teru, hinting that it was time for him to retreat and not frighten the crown princess. The beast did not linger and happily ran out of the room. Khalid said he wanted to ask Neris for one thing. She thought he wanted to add something to the contract, but no. The prince knelt down in front of his beloved and said that they needed to ask for a blessing together. Neris immediately thought that this was probably some kind of marriage. She asked what she should do. The heir replied that it was nothing special. She simply had to continue to remain on his side. The maids actively helped Neri get ready for the celebration, suggesting what jewelry to wear and choosing a dress for her. The girl knew that sailors were superstitious, but she didn't think they were that superstitious. She was amazed by the responsibility and dedication with which they prepared for some kind of conventional ritual. The prince told her that they would soon enter imperial waters, so they must perform a ritual in honor of the Lord of the Seas. If this was not done, they could encounter bad weather, be blown off course, or even be shipwrecked. All this time, the actress tried not to be seen by the ship's crew and was now worried about how they would receive her. The prince came in to check if everything was okay and asked if his beloved was nervous before the ritual. She pretended not to be worried at all, trying to save face, and the prince said she didn't have to do anything. Khalid confirmed that this was true, so he couldn't help but worry about her. For Neris, this was all a first. He came closer and extended his hand towards her, so the princess became embarrassed, sincerely hoping that he was not going to kiss her. The heir really didn't, but only carefully adjusted the necklace on his beloved girl. He said it was completely normal to feel nervous before meeting the Lord of the Sea. After this, the young man left her, and the actress tried not to dwell on the guy. The maids had been standing obediently to the side all this time, watching the rulers, but now they could return to their work. Simon walked down the corridor next to the prince, reminding him that it would rain during the ceremony. The advisor asked Khalid if he was afraid of shocking the princess. He replied that some things should be seen with one's own eyes. When the moon rose, it was time for Neras to come out to her subjects and join the ritual. The moonlight illuminated her with its rays, inviting her to finally leave the cabin and go up to the deck of the ship. The crown princess wore a chic black dress with gold accents, and her face was covered by a dark veil. She walked forward with an elegant, confident gait, and the translucent hem of her robe fluttered beautifully in the wind. The girl was very happy to feel the fresh night air, but suddenly her attention was drawn to an incomprehensible noise. She asked what was its source, and a little girl, also serving her, pointed her finger at the princess to find the answer. It was the sound coming from a dozen people bowing before Neris. She remembered Simon's words that they were all a little surprised by her appearance, but respected His Highness's choice. He said that everyone would revere her, and no one would raise their head without her permission. And so it happened. All of Khalid's people, without exception, treated her with respect and submission, bowing on their knees. The little maid smiled contentedly at the princess's reaction and bowed to her as well. This was something new for the girl, and she clearly expected the worst. But it turned out quite the opposite. Neris walked past her subjects, and they, with their mouths open, looked after her and were amazed at the beauty of her highness. In fact, this obedience even scared her a little. Just think, they bowed to her as soon as she left. Having walked along the entire deck, the princess stopped at the edge of the ship, peering into the starry sky. One of her maids came up behind her, throwing a nice cloak over Neris's shoulders so she wouldn't freeze. The girl was surprised at how such a thin cape could be so warm. Taking a closer look at the cape, she realized that it was not an ordinary piece of clothing, but a magical artifact. Although there was nothing surprising, Khalid is a prince. He has many magical artifacts. Neris found this insanely cool. Hearing some noise behind her, she turned around, hoping to see the prince there. But instead, she noticed Teru. The unexpected encounter frightened the girl again, even though the animal sat quietly and innocently gaped. Neris was shaking all over from the tension and asked Teru what he wanted from her. But the tiger sat and calmly looked at her. Remembering where she was, the actress gathered her strength and forced herself to play the role of the ideal princess. She decided to simply ignore the beast and pretend that everything was fine. Her steadfastness delighted her subjects. The people were happy that their crown princess had gotten along with the prince's Tira, and Neris herself could hardly hold back her tears. The tiger was the first to hear the approaching steps of another person and turned his head towards the owner who had arrived. The people bowed their heads respectfully, greeting the heir of Iran as he passed them. Approaching the princess, Neris was incredibly happy to see him and noticed that Khalid was on time as always. The young man greeted the ship's crew graciously. He changed his everyday robe for a more elegant garment, also black. Neris and Khalid met each other's eyes for a moment and stood in blissful silence, looking at each other. The subjects were talking about the fact that the ceremony was about to begin, and were also discussing who the heir's bride would be. Khalid came closer to his beloved and smiled at her in support, extending his hand. Neris did not resist. She gently took the groom's hand, feeling how warm his palm was. He leaned closer and whispered in her ear that he was almost sold. It looked like she was genuinely happy to see him. The prince praised her for her performance, being as beautiful as she had said. But he did not know that the girl was not pretending. The subjects had almost finished preparing for the ritual, so it was time to begin. They laid out piles of gold bars and precious stones on the deck. Next to these riches lay a variety of fruits. This was an offering to the Lord of the Sea. The treasures were laid out in a row with great care. People tried to make the ritual go perfectly. The actress quietly whispered to Khalid that he had not told her how serious it would be. When the girl asked if she needed to do anything, he replied that she just needed to stay close. The crown prince and princess stood in front of the prepared offering and were ready to begin the ritual. Simon handed Khalid a branch of fern, which was to be used in the celebration. He happily accepted the offered attribute and again whispered to the bride that she should not be afraid. Neris was quite surprised by the fact that servants also played an important role in the ritual. They also had twigs. Everyone took a final deep breath, gathering their strength. The ritual began. Simon, looking carefully into the distance, announced that the ruler of the sea had already arrived. Neris peered into the emptiness of the endless horizon and tried to understand what was being discussed. Suddenly, the ship rocked, and the actress could barely stay on her feet, while her fiancé stood steadfastly by her side. She asked Khalid worriedly what was going on and if they were caught in a storm. Instead of answering the question, the girl heard one of her subjects loudly blowing a conch. The ship was carried forward. Its bow seemed to cut through the waves around it. But suddenly, the water beneath it began to glow. Khalid grabbed his beloved by the waist with one hand and calmed her down, explaining that it was not a storm, but the Lord of the Sea had appeared. Neris didn't really understand what was going on, but she knew for sure that there was something under the ship and it was looking at them. A huge dark shadow appeared beneath their ship, and around the giant silhouette, the sea surface was illuminated with a pale green. The prince pulled the frightened and wary girl closer to him, letting her know that she was safe. He was not worried at all, but on the contrary, he looked confident and watched what was happening with a patronizing look. Suddenly, the dark silhouette took on a slightly clearer outline, and the eyes of the master began to glow a bright blue in the water. The noise that was spreading around the area was deafening, and the actress covered her ears, just so as not to hear it. It didn't stay that loud for long, and when silence reigned again, the prince kissed the girl on the forehead, reminding her that everything was okay. The next part of the ritual began, and the maids simultaneously began to sing a wonderful song with their gentle voices. But the actress looked at the guy standing next to her and thought how he could look so brave, even without armor. Khalid confidently, in his native language, asked the Lord of the Sea to open up. Neris didn't understand what the prince said, but she was very curious about what he said with such a sharp look. The sea spirit looked attentively at the ship from the darkness, and, in response to Khalid's request, his eyes flashed in a friendly, playful manner. The heir unobtrusively took the princess's hand in his, intending to show her something. He helped raise her palm higher and told her to watch carefully what was about to happen. Khalid extended their hands forward, and the girl touched some flexible barrier in the air with her fingers. At that time, she did not yet know the meaning of the strange ritual, which she considered a simple superstition. That day, on the ship, enveloped in enchanting singing and magic, Neris encountered a part of herself that she did not know about. A spirit of immense size rose above the ship, greeting the people. It vaguely resembled some kind of dark reptile. The entire space around was filled with sparkling sparks and a mesmerizing magical glow that emanated from the spirit. Khalid announced with pride and triumph in his voice that he was welcome to Iran. His beloved could not take her eyes off this magical atmosphere created by the glow, the starry night, and the singing. The maids sang praises to the Lord of the Sea, and despite the fact that the song was in a language unknown to Neris, she understood it. And then everything became clear. She simply saw the one for whom they sang this song. She could not believe the reality of everything that was happening, and, without expecting it, fainted from an excess of feelings. Khalid, worried about the girl, immediately carried her to the cabin. By the time he reached her, Neris had managed to come to her senses. The actress asked the guy to let her go so they could sit down and talk, but he sat down on the sofa, still holding her in his arms. Simon also confirmed that it would be better if she trusted the prince, since Neris had used up too much strength. The advisor added that given how strong the synastry was between her and Khalid, the closer they were, the better for her. She suddenly asked what Simon had on his shoulders. It was his Terra, a snake. After crossing the border, he was able to summon her. The girl then asked what synastry was. The advisor replied that, in short, her mana and Khalid's mana were compatible, so much so that their presence near each other will be beneficial to both. Simon wanted to continue, but he was interrupted. The prince said that was enough. If the advisor continued, the princess would definitely not be able to sleep. The blonde briefly summed up his subject's words by saying that Irene is a country of magicians, and that's the end of it. Simon was outraged by such a barbaric compression of information from the prince, but Khalid said that Neris should be given a rest. He also asked that his subjects pay special attention to food and even prepare water for the princess with care. Neris did not like that Khalid had thrown Simon out so quickly and asked the advisor to finish his story in detail. She asked the advisor if the fact that they were now at the border had anything to do with what she had seen. Simon asked permission to explain his answer to the princess as briefly as possible. The border referred to the waters between the central continent and the Iron Empire. In simple terms, this is the place where the transition was located between the part of the world where magic disappeared and where it remained. The spirit she saw was a dragon that protected the balance. His name was Erig. They rarely saw his true form. Simon assumed that Erig had come out of the shadows because he was interested in taking a look at Neris. Khalid stopped the advisor and said that he could tell her the rest later, but the actress did not calm down. Simon promised to tell her everything later. He was glad that the princess was not scared, but full of enthusiasm. The advisor left the cabin, and the young man carried the girl to the bed so that she could rest. He carefully sat her down on the bed and walked towards the exit of the room. The young man thought that the actress would sleep better if he was not around. Neris couldn't understand what had happened to him today and why the prince was so cautious towards her. She said that perhaps it would be better if she left instead. Khalid asked her in confusion what she meant. The brunette, getting up from the bed, asked if it wasn't because of her that the prince couldn't bring anyone here. Well, since she brought up the topic, she wanted to know how many girlfriends Khalid has and how often he changes them. He had no idea what she was talking about, but Neris clarified that she was interested in knowing about his mistresses. The girl understood that it was just a game, but as his, albeit fake, bride, she deserved to know the answer. She continued her speech and said that she could very well sleep in another cabin, but Khalid suddenly cut her off mid-sentence. He pushed the dark-haired girl onto the bed, squeezing her wrists, blocking her movements, and asked her to stop talking about it. The girl turned away from him in shame, but the prince persistently asked her to look him in the eyes. He asked if she could do the same while looking into his face. He had no other women, only Neris. He didn't want to seem worse than he really was. The prince stood up and apologized for attacking her so abruptly. It was just hard to control himself. He was about to leave the room and so advised Neri to take advantage of the free time and rest. But the girl did not let him leave, jumping out of bed and completely unexpectedly pressing her lips to his. The guy expected any reaction, but not this. He asked why she kissed him. Neris called her kiss an apology for her mistake and doubts about him. Khalid reiterated that he has never kept someone close to him for the sake of a casual relationship. And he gave the bracelets to Neris initially because he simply thought they were beautiful. He felt embarrassed that neither he nor the maids, who were actually priestesses, could explain this to Neris. The actress smiled calmly at him and said that she was glad that it was just a misunderstanding. Khalid assured her that it was he who should ask for forgiveness. Therefore, he was sorry. Khalid's eyes were burning, waiting for Neris's consent to kiss her again, and the girl's heart began to beat faster too. The prince lifted her into his arms, never taking his eyes off hers. Now they yearned for the same thing. They merged into another demanding kiss, enjoying the fact that they could express their feelings. Khalid was breathing heavily, He could not hold back any longer. Since they both wanted to continue, the lovers made love. Some time later, Khalid and Neris were lying in bed together. She asked if her subjects thought she was strange. She was worried that she might ruin the first impression of herself by fainting in front of everyone. Khalid calmed his beloved down and said that, on the contrary, she had done very well. On the contrary, Neris did not disgrace herself, but coped with her task perfectly. And she fell right into his hands, so they avoided any problems. Khalid kissed her hand and reminded her that, as Simon had said, the dragon rarely showed interest in anyone. He told her that no one in the world could compare to her. And it was worth remembering and never forgetting. And the search for the girl in Weldon continued. The Count came to Madame to ask where she had disappeared to. The woman replied that she had no idea. The Count was depressed that they had combed the entire capital but had not found a single hair. He suspected the people from Fiore of the girl's disappearance, because only they could cover their tracks so perfectly. The aristocrat accused Madame of having Lesley's escape planned from the very beginning. Madame remained aloof. She insisted that the actress performed her role entirely in accordance with the contract. The Count's anger and desire to kill the actress was absurd. She played her role perfectly. She was personally responsible for each of her actors, and she didn't like that a man put her in an awkward position. Madame threatened the Count that she herself could start removing dissatisfied clients if she needed to. To prove this, her charges held a knife to the Count's throat as a warning. The Count said angrily that it was impossible to disappear from the wanted list if you had already ended up there. He suggested simply telling the police that the girl was dead. Then they would stop looking for her and calm down. Madame thanked the Count for making concessions to her, and they found a compromise. But the Count specified that in return, Madame would have to do something for him too. He wanted to make sure that the actress who played Veronica would never appear in the country again. Madame was surprised at how Lesley managed to work for such an unpleasant and strict man. The Count was prepared to pay as much for the fulfillment of the request as the prince had offered for Lesley's head. He asked if that would be enough, and the lady agreed. It was a good deal. Madame did not answer him, and did not promise this. The conversation was over. The Count left, and Madame thanked him for his patronage, but this conversation opened up in Madame the realization that, as she had thought, there was something in the county that she did not know about. As she watched the Count's retreating figure, the woman thought that Lesley had always been her highest-paid actress. The redhead even wanted Lesley to become her successor in the future. By throwing out the wanted poster, the lady seemed to have finally said goodbye to her former ward. Suddenly, the woman noticed that someone was listening to her conversation with the Count. She asked the purpose of his visit. It turned out to be the same mysterious man who appeared in Lesley's memories. The man asked emotionlessly why the lady was pretending not to know why he had come. He also didn't understand why she decided that he was eavesdropping. The man simply came at the wrong time. The woman said with displeasure that she didn't like that he came whenever he wanted. He said that if she was so concerned about him invading her personal space, then she shouldn't have meddled in his business. The man wanted to know where Lesley was, but the lady, calling him an instructor, said that the girl did not belong to him. The lady, not interested in the conversation, asked if she looked like someone who knew where Lesley might be. She couldn't threaten a man the way she had threatened the Count. She wondered why the instructor was so obsessed with the actress. He said that Madame was the only one who could help the actress disappear. She stood her ground and said that, no matter what he thought, she had no idea where the girl was. The woman said that the ship she had prepared for the girl had already sailed, but she was told that Lesley was not there. She looked at the man with a piercing, unfriendly gaze. Anyone would have shuddered from him, but not the instructor. The man decided to believe the lady and end the conversation there. It was time for him to go. He noted with a smile that the actress always knew how to surprise him. He would like to praise Lesley for this the next time they met. The instructor kissed the lady's hand goodbye, and she only thought about why the instructor was so self-confident. The man also had one request. He asked the lady if she found out where the actress was, to be sure to let him know. He was ready to pay for this information as much as the woman wanted. And after these words he left. Madame picked up a cup of tea and sighed wearily. As her day had been very busy, she poured the tea into the flower pot containing her magic earring. She gave the same earring to Lesley so that she could disguise herself. But only she knew that with the help of one earring, it was possible to find out the location of the second. That is why the woman buried her earring in a pot and decided to take this secret with her to the grave. The woman noted with irony that as her student, the girl had clearly learned the lesson that it was better to betray than to be betrayed. Lesley, or Neris, was sleeping peacefully after a hard day. Khalid was sitting on the edge of the bed and watching his sleeping lover. He was glad that the girl trusted him. And he also thought about why the girl had drawn the line if she had crossed it herself. Although he himself ultimately could not restrain himself from pushing the girl towards this decision. The actress had refused any touch from him, but now she kissed him whenever she felt like it. This had clearly brought them closer. He couldn't help but think that her kisses and smile made his heart skip a beat. She was the one next to whom it seemed to Khalid that the whole world stood still. He was happy next to his beloved Neris. Even though she didn't remember him and didn't trust him completely, he believed that a happy future awaited them. 10 years ago, when Neris was still little, she asked him to come back and take her when they grew up. These words became both a salvation and a curse for him. Simon entered the couple's room. He apologized for the sudden intrusion, but said that there was a matter requiring the prince's attention. Khalid suggested that it might be related to the border, and the advisor confirmed his fears. He said that their captive had committed suicide. The blonde winced, not expecting to hear anything like that. He realized that the question was really important, so he left his sleeping lover and followed Simon. They left the cabin, and Khalid told the advisor to tell him everything in more detail on the way. Meanwhile, Neris was tormented by yet another nerve-wracking nightmare. She dreamed of events from the past that were connected with a mysterious instructor. He taught her a secret technique that he believed was especially important on missions. This technique would trap the target and make the target feel as if a special connection was being established between them and the actress. The instructor sat on a chair, crossing his legs. The only thing the girl thought about in her dream was that she had to escape. Simon, meanwhile, was talking about the dead prisoner. According to him, the girl bit off her tongue. The prince could not restrain himself and began to angrily ask what kind of fool allowed the captive's gag to be removed. The advisor was taken aback by the prince's unrestrained tone, and he shuddered, but answered. The guards celebrated the ceremony and drank wine next to the prisoner's cell. They tried to be quiet and not attract attention, since the guards were the only ones who were not allowed to drink. Suddenly, their gathering was interrupted by noise from the cell. The prisoner was very ill and was vomiting. The warriors immediately interrupted their activities and rushed to check what was happening with the captive. They immediately realized that the girl needed air to feel better, so they removed the gag. They couldn't allow the prisoner to die before the interrogation was over, so it was only to the prisoner's advantage. Khalid understood that the guards were celebrating their return home after 2 years, but he could not forgive them for their oversight. The advisor apologized for not being able to keep track of this. The prince asked the young man to calm down, interrupting his subject's endless apologies. Khalid knew better than anyone how much attention the advisor paid to details. It wasn't his fault. The prince was once again convinced that his prisoner had an accomplice. Khalid said that there was no point in interrogating the guards because they were drunk, but he also couldn't put them all in the cell. While the prince and the advisor were wondering which of the guards could be an accomplice, San arrived. He said that Mr. Simon was not to blame and apologized for the guards. The advisor argued with the guy that he was not obligated to apologize for things he personally did not do. The prince patted the guard on the head and said that he would not torture all his subjects because of one spy. He said that they needed to focus on finding evidence. Sun was interested in what the heir meant. Khalid thought the accomplice had first tried to help her escape, but then killed her as soon as they crossed the border. Although, given the girl's madness and the complexity of the situation, he couldn't say anything for sure. Still, the prince was interested in why everything happened exactly at the moment of crossing the border. The advisor suggested that perhaps they needed mana. The blonde assured that if they had used magic, there should have been traces left behind. They needed to focus on searching. San and Simon said that they would take care of it, and the prince could continue to relax with the princess. But Khalid couldn't relax after crossing the border, as he was worried about the mutants. He knew he wasn't the only one who enjoyed not having to worry about their attacks while they were in Weldon. The prince said that since he was the only one with a full-fledged Terra, he had better remain on guard. Simon confirmed that this was a fair point. For example, San had no Terra at all. Khalid suggested leaving the guarding of the dungeon to Lana. He was sure that she was eager to do something. The advisor thought she would be perfect for the job, but Sun doubted that would stop her from causing trouble. Khalid suddenly told the advisor that there was something else he wanted to say. He pinched his subject on the cheek and told him to stay alert. This could not be allowed to happen again. Simon was a little unprepared for this. Despite the fact that the prince maintained an outward calm, he still got angry. At the same time, in an unknown room, the curtains were fluttering in the wind from behind an open window. An unknown woman lay in bed, and golden particles of magic swirled under the ceiling. Suddenly, the woman opened her eyes, which glowed with an unnatural magical light. Her eyes shone like flames for only a moment, and then they returned to their normal color, as if they had gone out. It was the sister of the deceased captive. She learned of the loss and regretted her sister's death. She thought that their master would be displeased and hoped that the death of her unborn child's aunt was not in vain. A week has passed since Khalid's ship crossed the border. Neris was drinking tea in the morning, on the deck. She was madly enjoying the weather outside. The sun warmed her with its rays. She was greeted by a light sea breeze and the gentle sound of the waves. But now, even while in the cabin, she didn't have to worry about the weather. The fact that they had crossed the border meant that everyone could now use magic. She was surprised to learn that even renovations could be done with magic. Khalid's room looked completely different. Over the past week, Neris and Simon began their lessons together. The advisor just arrived to conduct them. Neris, inspired by the wonderful weather and her endless thirst for learning, was ready for class. The lesson began, and the girl diligently took notes, writing down everything the advisor told her. He told her that fire, earth, water, and air were the basis of magic in Irina. She wrote that these were the 4 basic elements. Even with one element, people could have different abilities. She asked if she understood correctly that Simon had water magic and could heal others. The guy confirmed it. Simon was sincerely happy with her success in learning and her resourcefulness, so he smiled at the fact that she was absolutely right. She specified that the Terra is born in the image of its owner, and Simon was glad that the girl grasps information on the fly. Perhaps it was because Simon was so calm that his Terra was so charming. The girl said thoughtfully that it was quite convenient. The advisor, not understanding what she was talking about, asked again, but the girl did not reveal what she was thinking. She was curious to know why magic couldn't be used in Weldon. The advisor said that this was done to maintain the balance of the lands. As he said, magic ceased to exist on the central continent, but it remained in Arena. All this was decided by someone, and the girl immediately asked who was behind it. Simon agreed to tell her. The girl had already seen one of them. It was a dragon guarding the borders of the lands. The second is a tree that has taken root throughout the world, and the third is a witch of the northern lands. The fourth is the apparent greenery, hidden in a palace overgrown with thorn bushes. They were chosen to maintain the balance of the lands and were called guardians. It was they who deprived the central continent of magic, and a strict ban was imposed on the spread of magic outside of Arena. People were allowed to cross the border, but on the condition that they did not use magic. The girl thoughtfully said that Khalid must have been an amazing person to be able to keep the territory abroad. Simone said enthusiastically that it was so, and even the prince's tiger was unusual. And for Neris, any tiger was something unusual. She grumbled because the heir had not immediately said that the tiger could be put to sleep. The beast had scared the hell out of her all this time. Tara was lying in Khalid's room, sleeping on his mat, yawning sweetly. The advisor reminded Neris that the prince had control over the element of wind. She found this a little strange, because in her opinion, the earth element suited him much better. The earth element would suit a guy who was serious, hot, and towered majestically over everyone. She thought that Khalid was like an endless desert, scorched by the sun. Simon quietly looked at the girl. He confessed to the princess that he was glad to see that she liked his highness. The advisor also said he was sorry they couldn't get her on deck earlier because of the ban. But now the girl breathed in the fresh air with delight. She felt like a free bird. It turns out that the ship was also imbued with magic. It was some kind of large magical artifact. Simon decided to let the girl rest. She felt that she had become stronger during all the time spent on the ship. But before letting the advisor go and ending the lesson, the girl wanted to ask one more question. She was worried about whether she, as a foreigner who did not have magic or Thera, would be able to marry the crown prince. Simon corrected her and said that the girl actually had magic. He added that she doesn't feel it because she was born and raised on the other side. He is absolutely certain that Neris should have learned to control her strong water magic over time. Neris was very skeptical of the advisor's words, but he told her not to worry because he knew he was right. Since she couldn't yet properly control magic, even her simple kind words carried power. Others noticed this too, admiring how strong their princess's aura was. Fortunately, Neris's emotions were quite stable. She was very calm, so the magic did not harm her. But excessive use of magic could result in tragedy. Since magic is naturally linked to emotions, kind words brought blessings, and evil words brought harm. Neris also became interested in how to learn to transform magic. Simon answered that this is taught in families, even in childhood. He suddenly became thoughtful, most likely thinking about how best to teach the princess how to create true. The girl was a little confused when she saw the advisor's confusion. Simon suggested that she ask Prince Khalid to help her learn how to create Terra. The girl asked why Simon couldn't do it himself. His cheeks flushed, and he said that this training required close relationships, so he was not suitable. Now, Neris understood why the advisor was talking about family. In principle, everything was logical, because her situation was a little special. Even though she didn't remember her father, she still had memories of her mother. Her mother loved Neris, despite her difficult life. The girl appreciated it, although she did not remember the feeling when she hugged her. The princess said that, no matter what the advisor said, she was born in Weldon, where, as he said, there has long been no magic. Simon replied that there were Iranians who moved to Weldon for their own reasons. It turned out that Khalid was the only one who could help her learn how to create Terra, as he was the closest person now. The girl asked how they could have synastry with Khalid if they have opposite elements of magic. Suddenly, guards burst onto the deck with a huge roar and shouts. The presence of strangers nearby meant that the conversation, and with it today's lesson, was over. Simon and Neris turned in surprise towards the noise. Lana was sitting on top of one of the guards, knocking her down to the floor. The one lying on the floor begged for mercy and asked for salvation. Lana, noticing that Simon and the princess were on deck, quickly apologized for her behavior. She knelt before the crown princess and begged for forgiveness for frightening her. All the other guards followed her example and also apologized, kneeling before the heir's bride. Simon, barely containing his own irritation, asked what had happened to them this time. Simon, with a cold, unfriendly smile, asked the princess in what way she would like to punish her subjects. Lana, having heard the cruel punishment options from Simon, trembled with fear and repented even more. In fact, the princess did not want to do any of these things at all. She remembered the magical artifact that allowed her to translate the speech of the arena settlers. Because of the ban, it only activated when they crossed the border, and not before, whenever she wore it before. Suddenly, she understood why, at the ceremony, she was able to make out the words of the priestess's song addressed to the sea dragon. This artifact was quite convenient and made her future life in the kingdom much easier. The situation made her laugh, because now Neris knew that the artifact could even translate curses. 10 minutes ago, Simon finally told Neris that his and Khalid's elements are compatible. He didn't know how it happened, but apparently his connection with the prince was simply special. And it was at these very words that the advisor and the princess heard Lana chasing the guards, cursing loudly. They didn't yet know what the guards had done, but they heard Lana threatening them with some not-so-nice words. Having cornered them, she wanted to give them at least a slap on the back of the head, so, trying to escape, they poured out onto the deck. The princess was only amused by such behavior. She thought that when Lana was angry, she was frightening and sharp-tongued. Seeing the fire blazing around Lana, Neris asked if it was the girl's Terra. Lana was immediately confused. Simon hurried her with an answer, because it was not worth keeping the princess waiting. The guard answered that she did, but she was very ashamed, thinking that she did not dare to show such a disgusting Terra to the princess. After Lana answered the question, Simon suggested returning to the previous topic and thinking about the punishment. Neris knelt down before the guard and looking at her fire, said that her Terra resembled fiery wings. She carefully tried to touch the fire with her fingers to get a closer look at the Terra. The princess said it looked incredibly beautiful, and Lana didn't expect such a statement at all. Until this moment, Lana could only see the princess from afar, but she could not even imagine that she would see the girl up close. Taking a piece of the magic fire in her hands, the princess said that she thought it would be hot, but it turned out to be pleasant and warm. Neris asked if Lana was one of Khalid's personal guards, and what she could call her. The redhead thought that her mana had never been so stable. This was also the princess's power. Tears appeared in Lana's eyes, and the guards who stood behind her were shocked that the girl was crying. The girl wiped away her tears and told the princess that she could simply call her Lana. The guard said that she understood that she had many shortcomings, but she wanted to try and become Neris's personal knight. Simon interrupted their conversation, saying that Irene had no such thing as a knight. Lana again didn't understand what she was talking about. The guard did not listen to the advisor and took the princess's hand in her own. The redhead asked him if a knight wasn't just another name for a guard. She wanted to protect Neris at all costs. The advisor, as well as the princess, were surprised by the girl's assertiveness, and the inspired guard again asked Neris permission to protect her. Simon reminded the girl that she still had the position of commander of the border detachment. Meanwhile, her twin felt some strange trembling and anxiety. It was as if he sensed that Lana was in trouble. Khalid asked San what the guilty guards had told him. The boy replied that nothing remarkable. The prince replied that there were only two options. Either the captive was too cautious, or her accomplice was too skillful. San seriously asked if he should start an investigation and thoroughly study the events of that night. Khalid suggested they wait first and make sure they weren't attacked by mutants. San said they had increased their guard. The crown prince chuckled and smiled. It was good news that everything was calm for now. Even though everything was calm for now, the prince told them to remain vigilant in any case. A little later, the priestesses spoke with the princess and said that after the ceremony, they could now serve her for days on end. The princess told them that she had not seen Khalid at all lately. One of the priestesses said that Khalid was forced to work both day and night. The maids said that it would be worthwhile to talk to Simon. Perhaps the prince had a reason for working so much. They continued to argue and gossip, and the girl thought that perhaps it would have been better not to understand them before. She was still curious as to why she was being looked after by priestesses and not ordinary maids. The girls introduced themselves to her one by one, as they had not told their names before. The redhead's name was Sue. She was a priestess of water. The girl still couldn't get over the realization that such responsible and important people were looking after her. The brunette's name was Soot. She was a priestess of fire. And the third one was Ja. She was a priestess of earth. The girls explained to her that their titles were equivalent to bishops in Weldon. This surprised the princess even more. One of the girls explained that, unlike bishops, they do not serve God. Water, fire, wind, and earth. The priestesses protected the peace of these elements, for which they were blessed by them. No matter how long their journey is, as long as the girls are on board, their journey will be successful. Thanks to everyone could enjoy the wonderful weather and easy travel. The princess happily noted that this was probably the reason why she had not yet become seasick. She also asked the maids where the fourth priestess of the wind was in that case. The redhead replied that Prince Khalid was the high priest of the wind. And since the priestesses were always supposed to help the high priest, they were entrusted with taking care of the princess. Neris said sadly that it was probably in vain that they were preparing her for the meeting with the prince. She did not want to disturb him, since he was so busy. When they finished packing the princess, she was invited to go to the dining room. She was surprised that she had to wear so many decorations every time, although the day was almost over. One of the priestesses said that these were all magical artifacts, and they would help the princess adapt faster. The girls asked her if she was comfortable with the jewelry, and she said that everything was fine. Then some time passed, and the evening on board the ship was beautiful. Khalid sat on the deck and tossed a dagger in his hand. His Terra came up to him and asked him why he was sitting with such a gloomy expression on his face. Tiger said that Khalid should stay close to the crown princess and protect her. Khalid asked what the tiger was doing here, since he had instructed the tiger to look after the girl. Suddenly, he shrank to the size of a tiger cub. He said that her aura scared him, and he was constantly sleepy. He said that something had to be done about it, and asked the prince to help her harness and control her power. The guy muttered that he had already done a lot for her lately. The tiger glared at him angrily and said that this was not enough. They would soon be approaching the ground. It was worth hurrying. The young man stroked his beast, and it said that the prince would be safer if the girl awakened the power. Khalid said that he knew this, but asked the tiger to wait a little longer. Suddenly, the prince stopped petting his beast, and his hand trembled. He turned around and saw that right next to him on the deck stood a huge dark mutant with blood-red eyes. The monster bared its sharp fangs, growling frighteningly, and preparing to pounce on the prince at any moment. But the fair-haired man was an excellent warrior, so with one confident blow of his sword, he cut the mutant in half. The monster immediately fell into the seawater, coloring it burgundy. Other guards came running to the noise and growling, worried about whether His Highness was okay. The blond man replied that he was fine and asked to make sure that no one else had gotten on board. The guards were concerned about how the mutant had managed to get past the guards. They were going to increase the security on deck. The tiger sarcastically remarked that the monsters were already here, which meant they were approaching land. The tiger was concerned that such slowness in battle was not typical of the prince. The tiger assumed that he was very tired. Khalid admitted that his thoughts have been elsewhere lately. Tira offered to train the princess so that she could become an aide in battle, but the prince sternly said that he did not agree. Meanwhile, Neri was still sitting in the dining room and was indignant about the prince making her wait. She thought sadly that perhaps he had already become tired of her. She was surprised by her own thoughts, because she never thought that she could miss Khalid so much. There was a knock on the cabin door, and the princess immediately rushed to open it. She hoped that Khalid was standing behind the door, but it was not so. San came to her because he was ordered to keep her company at dinner and to guard her. The prince and Simon believed that interacting with different people would allow her to awaken her magic. The girl was only glad of the guard's presence because she had just become bored. San entered the cabin and stood with his hands behind his back, keeping an eye on the girl. She told him to stop being so serious and sit down next to her. She thought that Khalid wasn't going to show up anyway, so it wouldn't do any good. Sun said that the prince was unable to come simply because he encountered a mutant on the deck. But a moment later, the guard reproached himself for the words he had spoken, because he shouldn't have made the princess worry. Neris asked again, not having heard his words, and he nervously replied that it was nothing important and thanked him for the invitation. The boy attacked the food with gusto, actively chewing it. The girl watched with a slight smile as the young man began to eat his dinner with such pleasure. Suddenly, she told him that she and her sister really did look incredibly similar. San looked up from his meal and suggested that Lana was probably causing the princess a lot of trouble. He apologized for his sister again, but Neris told him not to worry, because the princess liked Lana's honesty. She laughed quietly and said that although the twins were so similar, they had completely different personalities. The guy said dejectedly that since the princess already liked Lana's character, it turned out that she didn't like his character. The girl suddenly became too serious and even jumped up in her seat. She said that it was not so. The guard laughed at how funny and cute the princess looked. He was pleased that she thought well of them. Neris laughed in response. The guards were so simple and pleasant in conversation that she liked it. During the evening, Neris asked San if he was a knight like his sister. He replied that one could say so. The girl was interested to know why they went on such a long journey. San began his explanation by saying that he and Lana were of the lower class of people. After the prince appointed them to their positions, everyone talked about it behind their backs and gossiped. Even though the twins were great warriors, people still talked about them in a negative way. No matter how strong and well-trained they are, the fact that they are of low birth remains unchanged. The only one who never expressed any doubt was Prince Khalid. He did not judge people by their origins. He valued the personal qualities of warriors higher than what they could not change in themselves. San came aboard this ship because he believed in the prince, and he also wanted to repay him for everything he had done for them. The guy said he would always follow the prince no matter what happened. That explained why he was so strict with Lana. Neris was sure that the twins were much more competent than even those from noble families. San was amazed by the girl's kindness and, a little confused, thanked her for the praise. The guard also admitted that he had another goal. He pushed a plate of cookies towards the princess and said that during the period of unrest in Irene, the slave trade flourished. Many children were sold to other countries. For example, to Weldon. Then he and Lana lost their little sister. The princess was taken aback. She apologized for having to bring up the subject. She didn't know the twins had a sister. The girl expressed her regret about what happened, but San said that it was okay. It was not a secret. Despite combing the entire kingdom for the past 2 years, San could not find a trace. But he was not despondent. At least he did not show it. He believed that if fate was merciful, they would definitely meet. Suddenly, the girl asked if they had met by chance before. San replied that no, they had met on this ship. Neris said he seemed eerily familiar to her, a feeling she had developed after crossing the border. She thought she had definitely seen the guard before. At that moment, another man appeared in the cabin. It turned out to be Simon, who suddenly burst in and immediately shouted, addressing Neri, that her actions were inappropriate. The princess did not understand what the young man was angry about, and instead of asking a question, she greeted him joyfully. Simon even started to stutter out of surprise. He was confused by what the girl was saying to San. The advisor asked if in Weldon the way they spoke to the guard was not called flirting. Neris laughed and said that the advisor had got it all wrong. She was surprised that he even knew the word. Simon said that the girl could not flirt with anyone except the prince, and San even choked on such a strange guess. The guard quickly took his leave and ran away, so as not to aggravate the situation, and Neris explained to Simon that he had misunderstood her. San was about to run out of the cabin, but the princess tried to stop her. She didn't want him to run away so quickly, but she didn't have time to detain the guy. He left, accidentally slamming the door. The girl even began to breathe heavily, as she tried so hard to keep up with the red-haired man. But he turned out to be insanely fast. Neris told the advisor that she and San were just talking. He had been told that such phrases were used when flirting. Their conversation was interrupted by an unfamiliar voice that sounded behind Simon and Neris. Tara sternly told them to stop doing stupid things. The crown princess's magic had to manifest sooner. The girl wasn't just confused or surprised. She was in a complete stupor, not believing her ears. She asked the advisor in a trembling voice if Tara could really speak and why she only found out about it now. Tara looked at her sullenly. He thought that the princess had long known that he could talk. Simon said that usually not. But this tiger was special. That was another thing that made Khalid different from the others. The beast, quite unceremoniously, asked the girl point-blank why she and the prince both avoided copulation. He nudged his broad forehead against Neris's leg and told her that she should have awakened her magic faster. The girl jerked back in fear from the unexpected contact with the beast. She was still a little afraid of him. Simon said that he could not understand Tara as well as she did and asked what the tiger was talking about. She retold it, and the advisor asked for forgiveness for the fact that they all probably seemed like a bunch of boring grumblers to her now. Not finding anything interesting for himself in the cabin, Tara, without saying anything or saying goodbye, left them. Neris noticed that everyone wanted her powers to awaken lately. Simon, the priestesses, and now Thera. She asked the advisor what this synastry that Simon spoke about so often meant after all. The princess honestly admitted that she had been feeling uneasy a lot lately. Khalid had also been gone for several days. She tried to figure out why she felt so strange. Could it be because she missed the prince? Neris muttered thoughtfully, alternately worrying about the prince and thinking that she hated him. The girl suggested that perhaps synastry united the feelings of different people. Simon thought for a moment, trying to find the right words to explain the essence of things to the princess. But instead of him, Lana suddenly appeared behind him and answered. The girl said that of course it was so. For example, twins often experienced this and felt each other's emotions even when they were not close. Simon asked Lana, puzzled, what she was doing there. Neris was already tired of everyone who wanted to come to her. The guardian continued, saying that the twins were connected by a strong synastry. They compensated for each other's shortcomings. For example, Lana often caused trouble for everyone, while San, on the contrary, was calm and silent. However, the twins could always find a common language. Neris thought about it. Neris had never met anyone with whom she felt at ease. not even the madam she had known for so long. She was always vigilant, and the instructor's upbringing only deepened her mistrust of those around her. That is why the princess doubted that she and Khalid could have such a relationship. Lana, Simon, and Neris decided to have tea together. The princess continued to ask them about synastry. Lana said that synastry affects them, but not much. For example, she trains, but her power does not transfer to San. Neris listened as Lana said that she could rely on San when she had problems with mana. Having thought it over carefully, the princess herself finally agreed that she needed to awaken the power as soon as possible. Simon thought that this must not have been the only reason for the princess's desire. The advisor clenched his fists in excitement. This was a very convenient moment to help Khalid get together with Neris. He believed that he could do it skillfully, like Hathor, the goddess of love, femininity, and beauty. He asked if Neris thought that synastry affected her relationship with the prince. That was why there could be doubts. The princess said thoughtfully that Simon was right. She thought so. However, Neris had to control her own powers. This will help her finally sort out her feelings and emotions. She thoughtfully looked at the flag arena. She wanted to become the ideal crown princess who would be useful to the people of the kingdom and the prince. Lana, inspired by the princess's confidence and determination, also jumped up from her seat. Lana almost shouted that she would train harder to become a better knight for the princess. Neris beamed at the guard, telling her that she was doing a fine job. She trusted Lana. The princess was so irresistible, honest and convincing, that the red-haired girl was speechless. The guard was already wiping away the tears that were welling up and, becoming emotional, said that he would always be her knight. The dark-haired girl noted with a smile that the guard reminded her of a large puppy. Lana got down on one knee in front of Neris and asked her to believe her. She swore to dedicate her whole life to the girl. Quite unexpectedly, Khalid returned to the cabin and remarked out loud that his princess clearly knew how to charm people. He reminded her, slightly mockingly, that Lana had promised him the same thing. She answered evasively that now there were two of them. He reminded Lana that he had asked her to look after the princess and not to chatter idle so the guard could be free. Neris was pleasantly surprised by the fact that it was Khalid who asked his subjects to stay with her. Simon and Lana took their leave and left Neris and Khalid alone in the cabin at last. Neris said this out loud. The young man replied that it was supposed to be that way because it was their room. And Therese, who was sleeping in the corner. The princess answered the prince, slightly offended, that for some reason she had been alone here lately. He said that he had asked Simon, the bois, and the priestesses to look after her. Wasn't that enough? She muttered resentfully that thanks for that too. She couldn't understand if he was really being so stupid or pretending not to understand. Khalid said that Neris shouldn't worry, because he would soon leave again. She was mad as hell about it. The prince clearly did not expect such a sharp reaction and blinked in confusion. Trying to hide her feelings, Neris said that the priestesses were worried that they might grow apart. Khalid asked in turn what the girl herself thought about this. He wanted to know if Neris was also worried about the possibility of them growing apart. She nervously said that of course she was worried about him, but because it was part of their contract, nothing more. Khalid noticed with displeasure that the girl was talking about their contract again. He didn't like it. Neris suggested changing the subject and talking about Lana. The prince asked if Neris wanted her to be her guard. He said he planned to assign someone to the girl after they got to Arena, but not Lana. The prince said that Lana had so many responsibilities already. Neris agreed, saying that she seemed like an incredible person. There weren't many female knights in Weldon. Girls were given little chance to learn the art of arms. And even if they passed this stage, many other difficulties awaited them. That's why Neris respected Lana so much. And her Terra looked powerful. Khalid asked in surprise about Lana's appearance, and the princess told him that she looked like a fiery phoenix. The phoenix was a bird that burned in its own fire in order to rise from the ashes. Terra Lana reminded Neris of the wings of a fiery phoenix. She found it incredibly interesting and majestic. Neris asked why Khalid was looking at her like that, and he replied that he was interested in listening to the girl's thoughts. Most people thought that Terra Lana was weak because she had poor control over her magic. Even though Lana had many responsibilities, no one trusted her powers when they first saw her. The girl asked if Khalid thought she had been too careless with her words. Khalid only said that he believed that Neris had always been a good judge of character, and had been right this time too. The princess asked him why he thought so. Had they known each other? The prince replied that he had known her for longer than she thought. The heir stood up from the sofa on which they were sitting, and the girl asked where he was going to go. The prince stopped and asked defiantly if he should stay longer. Neris was embarrassed by the prince's directness, and she hesitated a little, slow in answering. Khalid said the princess always looked upset when he left. He kissed her forehead tenderly and said that her reaction always made it hard for him to leave. Then he wished her sweet dreams. The prince left, and Neris, a little upset, thought about how she had failed to ask Khalid to help her with magic. The next day, Neris asked the priestesses if she should ask Simon or Lena to help her awaken the magic. They replied that a prince would be much more suitable. After all, there was a limit to physical contact with strangers. The red-haired fire priestess asked, how about they try to help the princess? She knew the method used by the training center in Sarajevo. It greatly increased people's interaction with magical powers. For example, Lana's younger sister was taught this method. The human's Terra was becoming clearer, and his magic was stronger. Lana might be angry that they told Neris about this. The princess was worried that she would interfere with their work if she agreed to this method. The conversation did not lead them to a clear answer. After some time, the sky darkened, and it was getting close to night. Neris was finally able to meet Khalid alone, and he led her by the hand onto the deck. The girl was looking forward to a pleasant evening, and thanked Khalid for bringing her here. The air was very relaxed. He replied that it would be good for them to breathe some fresh air. He also assured her that the ship had been enchanted with strong magic, so everything was fine, and there was no need to worry. More importantly, no one was to disturb them while Khalid was by her side. Neris happily asked again if he would stay with her, and the guy replied that of course he couldn't leave her alone. She shyly replied that she thought he was busy. The prince said that he should be near her. He pulled his beloved towards him by the waist, touching her tenderly, and said that soon she would become an integral part of his country. Neris asked if he was going to do what she thought he was going to do right there on deck. Khalid said confidently that yes, and he would continue to stand here with her. Only the girl did not understand why, if the ship was safe. The prince's fingers squeezed her waist tighter. Looking out into the distance at the stunning sunset, Khalid said that he had something to tell her as they approached land. But their personal conversation was interrupted by Tara, who approached them, looking menacingly and growling discontentedly. The prince stroked the animal and said that it was time for the girl to know the truth, so there was no point in getting angry and arguing. This whole situation seemed somehow strange and unexpected, so Neri didn't know what to think. Suddenly, the subjects rushed to the sides of the ship and joyfully shouted that they saw the Hazard Canyon. They were home. Khalid didn't expect them to arrive so quickly, and that would prevent him from finishing the conversation. He told Neris that the only way to get to Suraiv was to go through the Khazard Canyon. The heir extended his hand to his bride and asked if she would like to look at the canyon with him. The girl took his hand and, of course, happily accepted his proposal. He pulled her along. They were almost at the Empire of Iran, a golden land buried in the desert. The dark-haired girl's lilac eyes sparkled brightly, reflecting the sunset sunlight. A canyon of incredible beauty opened up before them, beckoning them, letting golden rays of sunlight pass between the rocks. Maybe it was the setting sun that was illuminating the magical empire, but Neris had a strange feeling. The next events happened so suddenly that she didn't even have time to react. An avalanche of fire poured towards them. Khalid covered them with his fireproof cloak, hugging the girl tightly so that she would not be harmed. The guy irritably asked someone else if he had tried too hard to say hello. The eyes were burning with hot air, and breathing in this position was very problematic. But soon the fire went out. The girl was able to catch her breath, and Khalid, worried, asked if his beloved was okay. A loud ringing laugh was heard nearby, and while Neri looked at the stranger in surprise, Khalid looked angrily. A man unknown to the princess landed on the deck of the ship, creating a lot, perhaps even too much noise. The heavy jump and strong burst of magic caused the ship to stagger, and it was difficult to stay on its feet. Neris, like the others, not expecting such a loud appearance of a man, could not stay on her feet due to the shaking deck. The prince carefully caught her, preventing her from falling, and told her to be more careful. The unexpected guest turned to Khalid and noted that he had not lost his grip, but he thought that Khalid had already died. A dark-haired, swarthy man looked at him, smiling defiantly. A pair of thick scars ran across one of his eyes. The princess was finally able to get a good look at the man and recognized him as Prince Khalif, whom Simon had told her about. Khalid asked why the caliph thought he was dead, and he replied that the prince had been absent from the country for 2 whole years. The fair-haired man asked why the prince had come at all and how long he would be hanging around here. The caliph told the guy not to be angry at the fire greeting. He knew perfectly well that the prince would block him. Prince Caliph was suddenly distracted from the topic of conversation by his attention being drawn to Khaled's bride behind him. He leaned over to Neris to get a better look at her and voiced that this was clearly the reason why Khalid had not returned. The blonde lightly pushed Khalaf in the shoulder, moving him away from the girl, and said that he knew where Khalid was and why. The man asked if he had understood correctly, then that Khalid had brought her from there. He immediately apologized to the future crown princess for his rudeness and asked if it was true. She confirmed and introduced herself. She was honored to be met by the famous warrior Scarlet Wing upon her arrival in Iran. He said there was no need to be so formal. She could just call him Caliph or Commander. He was Khalid's uncle. He patted the young man on the shoulder and said that if he had warned him about the princess in advance, he would have arranged a grand reception. The prince admitted that he really should have warned him. Then his uncle would not have been so reckless. Neris listened as Khalid and Caliph discussed his aunt and cousins. Caliph and Satira, his aunt, had 6 children in their family. She recalled that not long ago the advisor told her briefly about all of Khalid's relatives. The caliph owned lands in the east of the Iran Empire, including the Hazard Canyon, which was called Kazekh. The girl asked in surprise why the caliph had the title of prince if he was Khalid's uncle. Simon explained that in Iran, all the descendants of the emperor were princes and princesses. Surayev, located in the west of the empire, belonged to Prince Khalid. Only the eastern and western lands were guarded by princes, while the southern and northern ones were under the supervision of the emperor's guards. The crown prince was considered the strongest warrior in the entire empire, so he guarded the territories that needed protection. It was under Khalid's rule that Surayev became the most valuable region of the empire. Simon said he would tell more in the future. The caliph had heard that in Weldon it was customary to greet people with a handshake, so he extended both his hands to her. The handshake was a little strange, but Neris needed to make a good impression on Caliph. She extended her hand to him in response, but suddenly the prince's palms caught fire. The princess jerked back in fear, but the flames began to spread higher and higher up her arm. Khalid grabbed her wrist in fear and hurried to help. Suddenly, the fire began to dissipate little by little, but a different greenish magic was already swirling around their hands. Simon was no less excited and frightened, but Tara, on the contrary, was angry that the princess could be harmed. San barely held back his struggling sister, who wanted to rush to Neris and make sure everything was okay. The green magic flowing disappeared, and Khalid asked the advisor to urgently examine the girl. Simon carefully took Neris's wrist in his hands, apologizing in advance for any inconvenience. Khalid asked his uncle what had just happened, but the man himself did not know what had happened. It didn't matter whether it happened by accident or not, but the prince immediately became gloomy. He couldn't allow Neris to suffer. The girl, feeling awkward and anxious, tried to call out to the crown prince, but he did not respond. The caliph clenched his fist and said it was hard to believe that Neris's magic had not yet manifested. Not everyone could resist his magic. Simon told Caliph to curb his curiosity, and he apologized for scaring him. The princess looked at her hands thoughtfully and puzzled. So what happened was a confrontation of magic. Tara, in revenge for the frightened girl, began to tear Caliph's cloak, and he tried to break free, saying that he had already apologized. Uncle asked Khalid to calm the beast down, since he himself had done nothing wrong, but he did not even think of stopping the tiger. Quite unexpectedly, the calm and reserved Neris suggested to the commander that they continue their handshake. She extended her palm to the man and asked him to finish their greeting. Simon said that Caliph's magic was strong and aggressive. It was good that she tried to be polite, but it was not worth the risk. The uncle, who felt very awkward and ashamed, reminded the advisor that, in fact, He could hear everything. Khalid took his beloved by the hand and said that she should not be in such a hurry. But the girl didn't want to hear excuses and assured the guys that everything would be fine. Neris, still holding the prince's hand, simply thought that she was curious about what kind of person his uncle was. The princess also said that the caliph had greeted them so warmly that she would have been embarrassed to leave everything as it was. She looked at the groom with burning eyes and a pleading look, asking if he agreed. The guy was embarrassed and said that how could he refuse her, especially when she asked so much. The girl returned to Prince Caliph and again confidently extended her hand to him for a handshake. He took the princess's hand in his, and again their hands were enveloped in tongues of scarlet flame. But this time they did not look frightening. Suddenly, Neris felt an incredibly strange sensation, and the world around her seemed to change. It was as if she were in the epicenter of a fire, in an unfamiliar place. But the flames did not burn her. It seemed like it should have hurt, but she didn't feel any discomfort. While the girl was trying to understand what was happening and how she ended up in this place, a clawed beast almost attacked her. Khalid took the girl away from her uncle, and this magical vision instantly dissipated. She wanted to ask why the young man pulled her back. But suddenly, a large red bird flew nearby. It was Terra Khalifa that gave him the nickname Red Wings. To Neris's surprise, Prince Khalid laughed loudly and sincerely. The puzzled princess asked what was going on. She thought he was going to grab the sword, but he was laughing instead. The guy, with eyes burning with adoration, said that his princess was truly special. Uncle tried to calm his Terra with a gesture and said that everything was fine. There was nothing to worry about. Prince Caliph admired the girl for being so strong and brave and found it hard to believe that she had come from Weldon. Simon was amazed to inform the princess that she had managed to cope with the prince's magic, and this meant a lot. The subjects whispered among themselves and said with admiration that no one had ever managed to do this before. Neris asked Khalid what the guards were talking about and what he had just done. Instead of answering the question, the prince kissed his bride sensually, carefully holding her face in his hands. And then he left another kiss on her forehead, as if praising her for her courage. He kissed Neris's entire face and hugged her tightly, saying that he could no longer contain himself. The girl was incredibly embarrassed. She wanted to know the answer, but the prince's tenderness confused her. The caliph was also surprised by the girl's strength and tried to understand what kind of magic she had that was so strong. The prince added that she had not even managed to calm down his Taru, which also meant a lot. Neris wanted to say that it was because Khalid was nearby, but Caliph disagreed. Apparently, Neris subconsciously understood that she was stronger than him, and her magic was also offensive, regardless of the elements. It turned out that Terra Khalifa had appeared because his life was in danger. She couldn't believe she had saved him. Then the caliph said that it was time for him to leave. Otherwise, his wife would scold him if he returned home late. He said in a serious tone that Khalid would have to work immediately upon arrival in Surayev. Khalid replied that he would definitely do so and asked his uncle to also protect his lands. Prince Caliph promised that there was no need to worry about this and said that if there were any problems, he would always be happy to help. Uncle jumped off the side of the ship and, jumping onto his Terra, immediately flew away, disappearing into the distance. After some time, the ship finally reached land, and they found themselves in the port of Kajak. The sailors dropped anchor and climbed ashore, incredibly happy that they had finally arrived home. The subjects began to unload things from the ship, and together pulled all the boxes ashore. They were in a golden country surrounded by deserts. When Neris heard about Irina, she saw gloss and luxury before her eyes. But for some strange reason, as soon as she stepped off the ship, the sight of the city suddenly seemed very familiar to her. Suddenly, she remembered how Prince Khalid had recently unexpectedly kissed her in front of all his subjects, and she became embarrassed. She remembered that Simon told her that relationships are built not only on touch, but also on feelings. The princess was in deep thought and trying to understand whether her feelings for Khalid could be considered sincere. His bright smile, sudden kisses, honesty, and fleeting touches made her heart beat faster, and she couldn't resist his gaze when the prince called her by name. Whenever Neris was with Prince Khalid, her heart sank, and it was as if the whole world slowed down, and they were left alone in their world. Khalid asked the future crown princess with concern if she liked the view of the city. She wanted to answer, but she was interrupted by Simon, who came up and offered them to eat in the cabin. He had an important conversation. Until that day, it had been just a guess. But now Simon was sure that Neris's magic had already begun to gain strength. Neris reminded that the advisor spoke about the order. First you become stronger, then you form Thera, then abilities. But the girl felt nothing then on the deck. Simon said that the princess was an exception. The caliph deliberately allowed their forces to clash to show his superiority. His friendliness meant nothing. Simon said to keep in mind that in Irene, one can make a person kneel without using a single threat. Khalid honestly said that his uncle was a rude man, and she even shook his hand. Thoughtfully adjusting his binoculars, Simon said that they had two possible options: surrender or accept the challenge. It turned out that Neris accepted the challenge, but not intentionally. This decision was made not by the girl herself, but by her power. She assumed that perhaps she already had a Terra, although she did not notice any extra animals on the deck. Simon said that if Neris already had an invisible Teru, then he would have done his job just fine. The princess wondered what her magical beast might look like in the future. Simon also explained that Terra is always merciful to those who are kind to his master. But if the Terra encountered the owner's enemy, the Terra would attack him or try to protect its owner. Teru's behavior was intuitive. It was difficult for Neris at the moment, but she would understand in time. Simon said that not only did Neris not understand what she had done, but her actions were probably dictated by intuition. Neris looked at the advisor in surprise, trying to comprehend everything she had just learned from him. Khalid will ask if he understands correctly that subconsciously the girl is ripe for further development of her strength. He asked the princess what she felt when the caliph tried to give her away. She said that she didn't even understand anything. She felt like she was at the foot of a volcano that was about to erupt. But she wasn't worried, because it was a vision. The advisor asked with surprise whether it was true that Prince Caliph's feelings had been transmitted to Neris. Simon said enthusiastically that it was not a vision, but what her Terra felt. It turned out that he really had already appeared. Terra shared his feelings with her, which meant that the revelation of his abilities was not far off. Simon was very happy. Leaving the cabin, the advisor joyfully asked and promised to test her strength again upon arrival in Iran. The stunned girl tried to digest everything she had received from the advisor, which he was giving her so quickly. But the princess said that she was not at all surprised by his impulsiveness. Khalid had also become accustomed to it. Khalid stroked Neris's head and said he was surprised that his woman was even more amazing than he thought. He said softly that he was even more enchanted by her now. She didn't understand what he meant by these words, because they weren't in public. Khalid admitted that he was truly fascinated by her and even sincerely in love, so he wanted to show her his feelings. Then the prince invited her to go out into the fresh air together and take a walk. He took the princess by the hand and promised that she would definitely like the port of Kajak. Once the couple was outside, Neris shared that she thought they had already arrived at their destination. Khalid replied that they had moored there only for a while and would soon set off for Irin. The girl dreamily said that the city was incredibly beautiful, and it was a pity that they didn't stay there for long. Khalid wanted to give the princess something as a keepsake and pointed to the shops, telling her that she could choose whatever she wanted. The girl was surprised by how much gold jewelry was sold at the market. Was there really that much gold in his country? The guy drew Neri's attention to the fact that she was talking too loudly and asked her not to draw attention to them. He was glad that no one had yet discovered them under the capes and wanted to enjoy this moment of freedom with her. The girl was embarrassed, but she definitely enjoyed spending time with the crown prince, just the two of them. The prince picked up the necklace and asked Neris what she thought of it. He thought it would suit her very well, but he quickly noticed that the girl was not listening to him and was not even standing next to him, so in confusion, he called out her name. Turning around, he noticed that Neris was talking to a little girl about her wares. Neris listened attentively to the child and was interested in the decorations she had made with her own hands. This behavior once again amazed the prince, and he was once again convinced that his beloved was not ordinary. None of the expensive and sophisticated jewelry on the market interested her. Neri chose a little girl's gold hairpin. Neris looked incredibly happy and smiled joyfully at the prince, lighting up everything around her with her smile. The prince could hear his own heart beating in his chest. He understood that he was hopelessly in love with this girl. It was hard to tell what was hidden in the shadow that enveloped her, but he promised himself that soon there would be nothing left of the shadow. Khalid leaned over and paid the girl, saying that they would take both of the hairpins that Neris had just tried on. Trying to calm his pounding heart, the prince wanted to leave Neris for a while and go look around. But the girl was not satisfied with this. She asked why he was leaving if everything had just been good between them. The prince said it was because they had been discovered. He approached Neris Shady and said that, at his signal, they should run. He said that if they didn't attract attention, no one would chase them. But if they did, they wouldn't be able to sail today. Lana appeared behind them, smiling broadly as she offered to escort His Highness and keep them company. There was an immediate noise in the crowd. Everyone was looking around and trying to recognize their hero in the passers-by, searching for him with their eyes and shouting. The prince took Neris by the hand and signaled that it was time for them to run right now. The cape fell from his head, and he, pulling the girl by the hand, rushed forward as fast as possible, smiling broadly. After some time, Neri was taking a bath in the company of the priestesses, as always happened. The redhead asked Neri how the walk with Khalid went and whether she liked it. The princess smiled charmingly. She really enjoyed the walk. The port turned out to be very lively and even magical. It turns out that she even missed the land, so she especially enjoyed the walk, especially in good company. She gazed dreamily into the blue water, saying that now even her mood had noticeably improved. The maids asked what the princess would prefer to wear and how to style her hair, but she was completely lost in her thoughts. The princess said that this time she was going to completely entrust her image to them. One of the girls suggested that Neris at least choose the jewelry herself, and they would take care of the rest. The box that the maid brought contained wonderful-looking necklaces, bracelets, and more. Neris's attention was drawn to one particular necklace, and she asked if she understood correctly that it was made of amethyst. The priestesses said that yes, it was very beautiful, but not magical. Then one of them suggested engraving runes on the stones. Runes are magical symbols. Any objects with runes became magical. They were applied not only to jewelry, but also to other items of clothing and household items. For example, runes could be applied to clothing or dishes, even ships. But this required enormous power, so the priestesses could not imbue even amethyst with magic. However, Neris clarified whether it was true that they could make magical items. The girls replied that yes, the priests could apply runes to the jewelry, but their power would not be enough. They said that they had only recently become full priestesses, and moreover, had not practiced in Weldon for a long time. Neri finished her bath and climbed out of the pool, and the girls immediately handed her towels and a robe. The redhead also said that usually only Prince Khalid would put runes on jewelry. Amethyst was a gemstone, so it couldn't be damaged, and imbuing the item with weak magic was a bad idea. Neris thought it was cute for the audience to worry about the little things, but she was satisfied with a regular, non-magical necklace. Suddenly, the girl became interested in who owned the jewelry that she had been wearing all this time. The priestesses replied that the jewelry belonged to Neris, which meant she could do with it as she wished. The girls were surprised that the princess had any doubts about whether she could decide what to do with the jewels. Neris then suggested that they all practice putting runes on them together. She wanted to try it too. After some time, Neris was sitting in her and Khalid's cabin, adjusting her dress, which seemed too short in the front. Suddenly, a strange noise came from behind the door, and immediately after it, the front door swung open. The prince burst into the room, out of breath and seemingly dissatisfied with something. Neri said that she was waiting for Khalid to ask him something, and the guy arrived just in time. But he, without saying anything, ran up and grabbed her by the hand, pulling her along with him, without explaining anything. The girl did not resist or ask questions, but obediently stood up and followed the groom. From behind the closed door came Lana's voice, who was repenting of something, and Neris asked the guy what had already happened. Khalid said that they started asking him about what happened at the port, and he barely managed to escape. But the princess did not understand why it was necessary to run away. He could simply explain everything to her and not worry anymore. The prince said she was right, but for some reason he had run away without thinking, so now he needed to breathe out. He supposed that perhaps he just wanted to quickly hold Neris's hand again and feel her presence. Coming closer to the girl, the young man asked her not to run away from him. She herself said that they had no reason to run away. Neris replied that she had no intention of doing so. The guy asked her to respond to his confession in that case, but the girl hesitated, and so Khalid moved away, not wanting to put pressure on her, and said that he was ready to wait. Only when Khalid wanted to leave her, the princess called him and asked him to stay. Neris thought that she felt true love with Khalid, the love that was legendary. She wasn't sure, but she knew that his piercing gaze, his strong shoulders, the warmth of his body were driving her crazy. She really liked his long fingers with their protruding veins. Khalid admitted that he did not understand what was going on in the girl's soul, but he really wanted to figure it out. The girl interrupted him and stated with complete confidence that she really liked the guy. The prince was happy to hear this, but wanted to make sure that it was not a forced answer. Neris assured him that no matter what thoughts had been going through her head lately, she was sure that she liked him. The guy sat her down on the table and covered her lips with his, kissing the girl softly and for a long time. Pulling back for a moment, Neri asked if the young man could tell her why he was attracted to her. The guy took off his jacket and said that if he started listing reasons, then Neris would have to do the same. Neris replied that in that case, she was not yet ready to exchange thoughts on this matter. Besides, did Khalid really think that she would tell him all her secrets? After that, she asked why only the prince took off his clothes. She said that he felt hot after her words. Then the prince turned his back to her and asked if the crown princess would like something to drink. Khalid calmly sipped wine from his cup, while Neris's head was filled with doubts about where their relationship could lead. Neris asked, looking at the prince, if he liked to drink warm wine. He kissed her tenderly, glad that from now on, he could not restrain his impulses, fearing that the princess would be against it. The prince admired the beauty of his beloved for a little while longer and suggested that they begin. But Neris did not understand what he meant. Khalid replied that he suggested that they take turns sharing secrets about what they liked about each other. Neris, without thinking, began by saying that she really liked Khalid's voice. He wanted to know more details and asked what exactly the girl liked about his voice. The girl ran her fingers thoughtfully along the tabletop. She said it was quite difficult to explain. Khalid noticed this and placed his hand on Neris's wrist, carefully closing the distance between them. The guy asked her to think carefully, because he wanted to know everything about her feelings. He lifted her hand, intertwining their fingers, and exhaled, saying her name. Then the blonde man leaned towards the girl's ear and whispered her name again. The girl felt that, because of the prince, she was losing her self-control more and more with every second and asked to stop. He replied that in that case, she should get down to business as soon as possible. The heir said that it was time for Neris to admit that what was happening between them was a great rarity. The prince honestly admitted that he was driven crazy by thoughts of her, which is why he wanted to be even closer to her. They accidentally dropped a glass of wine, which had been standing on the table on the floor. Neris asked Khalid if he would stop if she said she didn't want what he wanted. He said yes, he definitely would. The prince asked if he should stop then, but Neris looked at him with a look that clearly wanted more. She ran her fingers along his cheekbones and told him not to stop. She let him do absolutely everything. With Khalid by her side, Neris could finally forget and not constantly think about her difficult past, trying to survive. The debts that fell upon her as a child after her mother's departure were a misfortune far greater than her departure itself. The girl had been under the protection of Madame since childhood. One day she found Neris on a bridge in the rain. The woman, noticing the lonely child, invited the girl to go with her, saying that she could help. The Madame told the girl that she could either die like her mother or go with her and be saved. Lesley had no reason to live, but what she feared most was dying. So she agreed to follow the woman. The red-haired woman took the child by the hand and led him to her estate. The instructor stood nearby. He accompanied Madame, but, as often, he stood in the shadows, saying nothing. Morning came, and another dream with Neris's memories of the past ended, allowing her to finally relax. The girl suddenly jumped up on the bed, realizing that she had no clothes on, which meant that she and Khalid had slept together again yesterday. In any case, she was glad that her relationship with the prince was improving, and life was fairly calm. Suddenly, a tiger stuck his face out from around the corner of the bed and praised Neris, saying that she had tried very hard yesterday. The girl, so frightened, even fell out of bed, pulling the blanket with her, and indignantly asked the tiger how long he had been there. The maids came running to the noise to see if everything was okay, and to make sure that the princess had already woken up. The sight they saw was impressive. The princess, covered only by a blanket, was sitting on the floor, and next to her was a Tara. The priestesses bowed their heads and apologized for catching Neris by surprise, and Tara walked out of the room with an important air. Even before she had fully recovered from her sleep, Neris wondered what was going on here. The redhead replied that they wanted to talk about something with the princess and left the cabin for a while, waiting for Neris. The girl quickly changed her clothes and returned to the maids to find out what was the reason for their concern. The girls looked at each other uncertainly, as if deciding which of them would confess first. The red-haired girl placed the very same box of jewelry in front of the princess and hastily asked for forgiveness. She said, disappointed and guilty, that they had unfortunately ruined everything. They tried to engrave a precious amethyst, and now they are ashamed that it didn't work. After talking about the runes, the priestesses wanted to please her, but they damaged the stone, and now it cannot be returned to its original form. Neris said that she had no intention of scolding them, since she had allowed them to use the decoration for practice. She said she had no regrets. It was the first magical item they had ever tried to make together, and she would treasure it. The girls thanked the princess and said that they did not know anyone with such a big heart as hers. Neris smiled, but thought about talking to Simon. She didn't want the priestesses to have problems because of her. The princess soon came to Khalid and asked where Simon was, but Khalid said he would not tell. The princess never expected to hear such a sharp answer from her fiancé. She asked Khalid why he answered her so sharply if she only asked where the advisor was. The prince replied that he did not know what she had in mind, but he had no intention of changing their agreement. The girl still did not understand what was being discussed and sat down next to Khalid, looking at him carefully. The blonde man said that he was not going to change even the last clause that the girl included in the contract. She was amused by how strictly and seriously the young man treated her wishes and their agreement. Perhaps the prince was afraid that the girl might change their contract and forbid him to touch her. She slyly asked what Khalid was worried about, and he replied that it was clearly not because of last night, because everything was wonderful. Neris suggested removing the last point of their agreement altogether, and Khalid was not expecting such a proposal. She said that adding this clause to their contract was a rather selfish decision, and she agreed to remove it. Neris added him at the last minute and didn't even consider his opinion. And Khalid didn't like it from the start. She said that in Weldon they couldn't change the contract after signing it, but she hoped that in Irina it would be possible. While the girl was thinking about all this, Khalid got up from the sofa and approached the girl from behind, hugging her from behind. The guy said that if she changes her mind and wants to return everything to the way it was, it will be too late. The girl turned to face him and asked if she should bring their contract yet. He asked her to stand with him like that for a little while longer, and then they would sort out the contract and other matters. After some time, standing on the deck, Prince Khalid talked with Simon, looking thoughtfully into the blue sea waters. He said that upon arrival in Iran, he would have one important matter to do, and Simon asked if it was related to Neris's abilities. Khalid frowned and replied that he would need to find out about the place where Neris had lived before coming to him. The prince said that even though Neris had grown up a lot, she couldn't help but remember him. She couldn't just forget him over time. He thought Neris had lost her memory. Sometime later, Khalid and Neris were in their cabin editing their contract. The prince asked if Neris really didn't remember their first meeting, or if she was just pretending not to remember. She said she only remembered meeting at the ball. Khalid apologized again for insulting her then. He had simply been looking for her for so long that their meeting seemed like a miracle to him, and she was smiling at some other guy. Neri said that she didn't know back then that things would turn out this way, so there was no need to apologize. Neris also asked why Khalid was looking for her. Did he already know then that she was a good actress? Although Veronica would have become a villain, according to the plan, no one knew about it yet. She was then amused that she had immediately quarreled with him, although she usually knew how to find the right approach to people. She was still very proud of herself at that time, because she managed to touch him and attract his attention. Looking at the completed, amended contract, The prince said that in fact their first meeting did not take place then. He said that long before that period there was a heavy rain on the bridge, and that was when their first meeting took place. Nerys was stunned and had no idea what the prince was talking about. Khalid relayed the entire conversation to Simon, who said that after crossing the border, she should have remembered him. The advisor said that everything should have been thoroughly investigated. There was something fishy about this matter. Simon said that if Her Highness's memory did not return, then in 2 years their relationship could really end. Suddenly, a large, frightening shadow covered the boys, and they immediately became wary. Khalid warned the advisor of the danger as soon as he noticed the appearance of a stranger. A flash of light, long blonde hair appeared before my eyes. The mysterious woman descended onto the ship, radiating insane self-satisfaction and self-confidence. The dark-skinned blonde, with eyes slightly darker than Khalid's, took a defensive stance, clutching a spear in her hand. She pinned Prince Khalid to the deck of the ship and sarcastically asked if the prince greeted all his guests half-naked. The boy greeted the girl dispassionately, addressing her as Nefer. While they were arguing, and Khalid was asking Nefer to step aside and let him get up, another man appeared on the deck. Noticing the new figure, the two fair-haired men turned around in unison. It was Nerys who came out when she heard the crash on the deck. She saw Khalid lying on the floor, and some other woman sitting on top of him, not at all embarrassed by it. It was clear from Nerys's face that she was very jealous, so she angrily asked what they were doing. When the stranger asked who this brunette was, Khalid explained that she was his fiancée. The girl couldn't understand when he had time. She became very angry, thinking that it was because of the girl that they had not seen Khalid for 2 whole years. Khalid told his family that he was leaving for a maximum of 3 months, but in the end, he disappeared for an unknown amount of time. He left and was not heard from for 2 whole years. They were all worried. The blonde was getting more and more angry with each passing second, saying that the guy obviously had no conscience at all. Khalid took the spear from the girl and asked her to finally calm down. During this time, Khalid never even once thought about his brother, who was stuck in remote areas because of him. The angry girl swung her arm and attacked the young man with a dagger in her hand. Nerys was incredibly scared for her fiancé and rushed to him, wanting to stop the girl and protect him. Just when the blonde was about to stab the guy with daggers, the princess stepped between them, covering him with her body. Khalid, calling back Nefer, tried to stop her, because now the princess was the one being hit instead of him. Nerys managed to grab Nefer by the wrist, stopping the hand with the dagger, so she remained almost intact. The girl managed to cut the brunette's cheek with a blade, but she was unwavering and suggested that they resolve the matter peacefully. Nerys was taken to the cabin for first aid, and her family was very worried about her. They bandaged her entire face, but the princess assured them that there was only a small scratch on her cheek, and such care was unnecessary. Khalid looked at her with excitement, especially her face. He asked for sure if his beloved had any other wounds. The red-haired priestess, almost crying, said that if she had more experience, she would have been able to heal her wounds. Nerys was finally able to remove all those unnecessary bandages from herself, and, for the final time, convinced everyone that she was okay. She was confident that she had managed to dodge Nefer's attack. Apparently, the girl had some kind of magical object that was capable of throwing people away like that. She was brought out of her thoughts by the priestess of fire, who suggested that the princess steam her feet. This would help calm her nerves. The girl readily agreed, carefully lowering her feet into the pleasantly hot water. The maid also brewed and brought Nerys some tea, which was also supposed to help her relax. The princess took the cup from the tray and obediently took a few sips. Although in reality, she thought that they were worrying about nonsense and that they all should relax. Suddenly, there was a cautious knock on the door, and Neri could not even guess who it could be. Simon stood up and went to open the door for the guest. A familiar silhouette flashed in the doorway. The advisor escorted Nefer to the princess and said that she would like to apologize for what happened. The blonde, placing her palm on her chest, offered her deepest apologies. Her recklessness had caused trouble. She dared to hurt the one who would one day be the empress, and she had to be punished. She was very sorry. The girl said resignedly that if Nerys wanted, she could take her lands of Sennar. The crown princess said that there was no need for it. It was her fault, too. Nerys asked everyone present to leave the room. because it would be humiliating for Nefer to apologize in front of everyone. Khalid protested, afraid that Nefer might do something else, but Neris stood her ground. The prince, Simon, and the priestesses, having followed the will of the princess, headed for the exit, looking back suspiciously. When they were left alone in the room, the brunette asked the offender to get up from her knees. Neris pulled her legs out of the water, creating a puddle on the floor. But she didn't care. The crown princess laughed and asked the blonde if she thought that this concern was unnecessary. Neris said that all this happened only because she did not immediately realize how strong Nefer was. She apologized to Nefer for rushing into battle so thoughtlessly, and the blonde was surprised how she knew her name. In fact, the imperial family's family tree was so huge that Neris could barely remember her name. But she still managed. Some time ago, reading the information Simon gave her, the brunette assumed that Nefer was an important member of the family. The advisor said that it was true. She was Khalid's cousin on his mother's side. Nefer was a dark warrior who defended Sennar, the borderlands in southern Irene. Her lands, like Khalid's lands, were located on the map slightly above the lands of Khalid's paternal uncle. Neris told Nefer that she knew her name because she had been entrusted with guarding the southern part of the empire. Hearing the princess speak of her with such admiration, the blonde said that she still had a lot to learn. Neri replied that she still had some learning to do herself, and apologized again for leaving a terrible first impression. And, taking advantage of the opportunity, the dark-haired one asked to keep this situation a secret from the imperial family. The blonde was taken aback and asked if Neris was going to make a scene about this. She replied that no, and also asked to keep the fact that she was steaming her feet right now a secret. She thought it was quite indecent and shameful to have her feet steamed just because of a scratch. Nefer thought that since Neris was the bride of her selfish cousin, she must be just like him, but it turned out that she was not. The blonde noted that the girl had a mysterious and captivating charm, but most importantly, Neris exuded an aura of goodwill, and the closer you were to her, the stronger you felt it. With a tired sigh, Nefer said that it was what she considered a great pity. It was at this moment that Khalid opened the door to the room, wanting to ask why the girls had been sitting there for so long. The blonde desperately wanted to know from the crown princess why only she agreed to marry her cousin. Khalid made an offended face, not understanding how the girls' conversation had turned in this direction. Nefer was so incredulous that Neris had chosen Khalid herself that she assumed she was being held against her will. She was more willing to assume that Khalid had kidnapped her or was blackmailing her than to accept that he was interested in someone like Neris. The princess came closer to the dark-haired girl and asked her to slowly blink twice if the girl was here against her will. Khalid, who was tired of listening to these tales, wanted to ask his sister to finally let his bride go. The girl continued, saying that just because Khalid was a good leader, it didn't mean he would be a good husband. Neris listened in surprise as Khalid and Nefer began to pick on each other over little things, constantly teasing each other. Neri suddenly interrupted their squabble with the words that they really couldn't predict how their marriage would turn out. However, she was absolutely sure that Khalid would do everything so that she would not regret her choice. These words, and the confidence with which the girl said them deeply, pierced the prince's heart, and he blushed all over. After all, Neris truly loved him, and didn't want to consider marrying anyone else. Simon was struck by these words to the point of brutality of his soul, and it seemed even Nefer was impressed. Neris tried to stay in character and not show her excitement, but she was worried that she might have overdone it. Khalid approached her and responded with feeling that he too loved her very much. Neris was afraid that her true feelings would come out, and one day Khalid would find out about everything. But at the same time, she wanted it to happen, and gazed with rapture into his golden eyes. Nefer still didn't understand what her brother had done to deserve this girl. He must have saved the world in his past life. Simon led the blonde into the next room to allow the crown prince and princess some privacy. The advisor suggested that Nefer be assigned a high priestess until they all reached Iran together. The girl replied that it was nonsense and that there was no point for a powerful priestess to accompany a weak warrior like her, although she would not have refused if Simon had accompanied her instead of the priestess. The advisor assured that a woman would be more suitable for the princess, and she was not a weak warrior. The girl said she was joking and wanted to see the twins. Simon was sure they would be only too happy, Nefer said that the only thing she missed more than the twins was the advisor, pulling him towards her by the hand. Simon tried to maintain his composure and replied that he, too, was glad to see Her Highness in good health. Nefer watched him closely, not understanding why he was not paying attention to her hints. Simon, having come to his senses a little after her exit, asked if everything was okay. The girl said that everything was really fine. She was just glad that Simon was here. She suddenly remembered that she had recently received news from her brother in Surayev. Something strange was happening at the border. She and Simon went out onto the deck, and the blonde said that the mutants had begun to attack less often. It was like the calm before the storm. Some thought the curse was weakening, but she was sure it wasn't. Simon asked if he understood correctly that exactly 3 weeks had passed since the news was received. The girl confirmed, but when asked what the advisor was thinking, she did not receive an answer from him. Simon looked thoughtfully at the waves and said that they crossed the border at about the same time. He thought that the number of mutants had decreased after the dragon appeared, but that could have just been a coincidence. Nefer meanwhile asked why it took them so long to return, but Simon could not give her a clear answer. Meanwhile, Khalid finished telling Neris what he had talked about with the Cetra while the princess was being bandaged. Neris said the guy could have at least embellished the truth a little, like when they told their story. For example, she declared with feeling how he could tell his sister the story of their love, making it more interesting. Khalid touched his beloved's face with his fingers and said that his cousin would most likely not believe him in such a case. If he had told Nefer that he had been looking for Neris for the last 2 years, she would not have believed him, or she would have misunderstood him. Neris asked what difference it made what her cousin thought. It was as he said. Khalid replied that he knew, but still preferred to keep quiet. He was afraid that his words might limit Neris, who loved her freedom so much. He was afraid that she might run away from him. He didn't want him to be the only one of the two of them to keep a promise from the past that the girl didn't even remember. It wasn't hard to wait. He was ready to wait until the end of his days until her memories returned, just as he waited for those 2 years he spent in Weldon, watching the girl furtively. The anticipation was nothing compared to the joy that Neris's existence brought Khalid. He pulled the girl close to him and told her not to worry about Nefer. Simon was supposed to take care of everything. Khalid ran his thumb gently over her cheek, saying that they had something to do too. The prince kissed his beloved girl, and she happily responded to the kiss, relaxing. He spoke his request to the girl on her lips, asking her to be careful and try not to get hurt again. Neris asked him to move to the bed, and Khalid said that her word was law on this ship. The young man carried his beloved to bed in his arms, as always, treating her incredibly carefully. He slowly lowered her onto the blankets, allowing her to sit in a position that was comfortable for the princess. Khalid towered over her and said that Neris was allowed to do everything except leave him. She asked with a carefree smile why she would need to leave him. The guy was about to kiss her on the neck, and she thought that she had no reason to run away, because she was in love with the prince. Suddenly, the blonde interrupted again, and also asked that Neris not tell other people about her love. The next day, Neris studied while sitting on the deck of the ship. She learned to read and write correctly in the language spoken in Arena, but she was thinking about something completely different. She had another strange dream, connected with a dark episode from her past. This happened every time she spent the night with Khalid, without exception. She assumed it might be because of synastry, but no one had ever told her anything like that before. Perhaps she should have discussed this with Khalid, or perhaps they knew something she didn't. Bringing the girl out of her reverie, Nefer appeared behind her, asking what the princess was thinking about. Neris was very surprised, because she did not notice the girl's appearance next to her. The brunette assumed that the princess had used the rope to appear unnoticed behind her back. Nefer begged the dark-haired girl to help her hide from them, but she didn't specify from whom exactly. Obviously, they were talking about the servants, because the blonde complained that they were trying to force her to comb her hair and dress up. Neris laughed briefly, convinced that the princess really was very freedom-loving. Returning to the original topic of conversation, Nefer again asked what was troubling Her Highness. The brunette asked in surprise if she really looked like something was bothering her. Suddenly, the blonde snapped her fingers, suggesting that Neris had already regretted her decision to get married. Nefer said that it was not too late to change her mind, and that she could help her break off the engagement. Neris, a little worried, voiced her guess that Princess Nefer was not happy about her marriage to Khalid. She was really worried that for some reason, her fiancé's cousin might be against their union. Nefer honestly admitted that she couldn't say that she liked this idea. Seeing my cousin smiling and daydreaming was so disgusting. Who would want to see such a picture? But for the most part, the blonde's statements were more of a joke than the truth, so she didn't stop them. Meanwhile, Nefer asked if the princess knew that Iran was cursed. Some time ago, mutants began to appear here out of nowhere, as if a curse from heaven had fallen upon their land. The closest to the source of the curse was the land of Khalid, the city of Surayev. 10 years ago, when the entire empire was in danger, it was Khalid who saved them all. By displaying valiant strength and courage, her fair-haired cousin became a hero in the eyes of all the people of the country. Neris replied that Simon had indeed told her about this. It was because of these actions that he became the crown prince. And thanks to this victory, their empire resumed business with the neighboring empire. It turned out that Iran was isolated. Nefer spoke of the Grendon Empire, which was ruled by a powerful emperor and whose army was merciless. And since then, both kingdoms have been working together to find a way to lift the curse. Sooner or later, they will succeed. The blonde said that Khalid was their hero and their son. He was only 17 when he won that game-changing victory. She took Neri's hand and told her that she need not worry. Their marriage would be happy. In the end, their son chose her, which means no one was in time to challenge his choice. Suddenly, the priestesses called out to Neris, and both princesses turned to the girls in unison. The maids said that they had prepared everything necessary for engraving the runes. She asked worriedly if they had come for her because she was late for their meeting. Neris was so engrossed in her conversation with the princess that she completely forgot that she had agreed to practice with the priestesses. The girl quickly said goodbye and suggested that Nefer meet later, and she wondered where Khalid had found such a charm. Meanwhile, Simon was enjoying the free minutes that he was finally able to find to bask in the bath. But just as he was rejoicing at his good fortune, Prince Khalid came into the bathroom, and Simon asked him what had happened. Khalid said that he had an important conversation with Simon, and he was indignant. Why exactly when he was resting? The prince, ignoring the advisor's displeasure, sat down and asked to listen to him carefully. The priestess of fire came to him. She said that she had to show Khalid something and brought a box of jewelry with her. The prince asked what was the matter, since they were just Neris's pendants, but the priestess said that they had carved runes on each one. Thanks to this, all amethysts became mid-level magic items. The runes were very small, so they didn't look very good, but they were effective. But the most interesting thing was that the runes on the jewelry did not look quite the way the priestesses wanted. Khalid was initially confused, not quite understanding what the girl wanted to tell him. He asked if it was true that the red-haired woman had carved runes that were difficult to make even for the high priest. She replied that it was, but only because Neris had touched the runes. Without her, they couldn't have done it. It was amazing. It seemed like Neris had the ability to increase the powers of the people around her. Instead of commenting on the guess, Khalid told her that the greatest task for a priest was to find a patron. He turned to the red-haired priestess and said that from that moment on, he would be her patron for life. But Khalid made a clarification and said that in exchange the priestess would serve not him, but Neris Karim Hartman. He ordered that no one should be told about this and that Neris should not know the meaning of these runes. The priestesses had to be convinced. Khalid finished his story in front of Simon. During this time, he managed to join the advisor and also take a bath. Simon listened to him attentively, but also did not understand the urgency of this conversation, why they were talking in the bathroom. He asked why the prince decided to keep everything a secret from Neris, and also that it was the first time he had seen a person who influenced the runes. It turned out that if the runes were carved by the priestesses of the sanctuary, then these were runes of purification. Simon said in a routine manner that their power could change the fate of all of Irina. Khalid interrupted him and said that there was no need to use and push Neris into this, so it was better for her not to know. He suddenly became serious and asked if he needed to be told what they would say about a person with such power. Unlike healing magic, which healed wounds and restored energy, purification magic removed destruction. In addition, the magic of purification removed impurities and was stronger than the balance of the world. One day, Iran was on the verge of defeat due to a dark curse that no magic could remove. Houses collapsed, People died. Mutants could take away and destroy everything that the inhabitants of the kingdom had strived for so long. Just when everyone had almost lost hope, a man appeared who could help them. It was Emperor Ramidus, a hero who used the purifying power without hesitation. He was able to save Iran alone. He had light gray eyes, long gray hair, and a mole under his eye. But such selflessness had its price, and unfortunately, the emperor died. Simon knew the story, but assured the prince that things were different now. Ramidus carried his burden alone, but they could make magical items for Neris, and Khalid would support her. Simon desperately tried to prove to Khalid that he couldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening, stuttering a little. He was so excited that he even stood up from nerves, continuing his speech standing. The advisor emotionally asked if Khalid really knew that Her Highness had purification magic. The prince replied boredly that Simon should have used his intelligence elsewhere. Simon might have taken a closer look at the woman who was worried about him. In any case, the prince did not want to change his mind. But the advisor did not want to end the conversation so quickly and asked when and how the princess showed her power. Simon also wondered if the prince had been hiding her powers since the day they crossed the border. Khalid replied sternly that Neris needed to be taken care of. She was not a toy in the imperial house. Simon was confused, but he just wanted to know when she had shown her powers. Khalid said his questions were pointless. Khalid once again reminded them of his guess that the girl had lost her memory. They couldn't put pressure on her, even when the prince tried to tell her and remind her of their meeting 10 years ago. Neris did not understand anything. She asked him in surprise how this could be. She would definitely remember their meeting. The prince remembered the sound of the rain, and the river, and her voice. He had forgotten nothing about that day. The princess said it was amazing. Neris didn't take his story very seriously, and laughing, only asked if she was already so beautiful then. Khalid was very confused. He did not expect that after his story, the princess would joke with him. The girl asked if he had met her when she played Brianna, the bride of an aristocrat. He replied that he was not talking about what happened when she became an actress, but about a moment long before that. She suggested it could have been 7 years ago, when she tried to jump off a bridge because of debts. The girl said that if he had known her for so long and waited so long to hire her, she was surprised, but she felt that there was no need to flatter her, since they got along well anyway, and Neris had no doubts about her feelings either. Then Khalid stopped trying to remind her of the past. Simon asked if that was why the prince had asked him to find out about Fiore. Khalid said that Neris hadn't lied. She really didn't remember. The blond man thought for a moment and poured himself some red wine into his golden goblet. He felt that he had made a mistake in any case when he started this conversation with the princess. It had taken him so long to get close to Neris. He didn't want to jeopardize their relationship. Simon said that he understood the prince perfectly, but if her memories did not return, then in 2 years she would run away. The advisor summed up that, no matter how you look at it, it all didn't sound very good. But he had one idea. Simon thought for a moment, and with an important air went over all the pros and cons of his new idea. It should have been mentioned earlier, but Simon was a scientist, the son of an official, and had many achievements in science and politics. But the advisor was very emotional, and now all his attention was focused on Khalid, his Terra, and Neris. As a curious person and a desperate scientist, Simon was interested in studying the magic of such powerful people. Simon thought that since the prince was so worried about Neris, it was worth returning her memories as soon as possible. If they could do that, then Neris would also keep her past promise, and she and Khalid would be happy. Simon expressed his idea that damaged memories could be restored with earth magic. Khalid replied that then many would find out, and it could become her weak point if rumors spread. The advisor did not lose hope for a positive response from the heir, and emphasized that his idea was still good. Simon asked if he understood correctly that the wedding ceremony would soon take place. He was absolutely right. Meanwhile, the priestesses, as always, helped the princess get ready and chatted about all sorts of little things at the same time. The redhead noted that today was a special day for them and suggested wearing new jewelry. Neri replied that she did not want to and wished to keep only the earrings that she already had on. It was a magic earring from Madame, so the girl did not want to take it off and said to take a closer look at the bracelets. She remembered the instructor's instructions that no one could be trusted while she was on a mission. From the moment she boarded the ship, she played the role of a foreigner flawlessly. In a foreign country, she could trust only herself. The priestesses whispered that Neris had not changed her earrings since her very first appearance. Apparently, they were dear to her. A picturesque sunset painted the sky and clouds in soft pink and peach colors. Neris's hands were shaking a little. She was very worried and couldn't pull herself together. Khalid, who had come up to her on deck, froze, struck by the unearthly beauty of his beloved. She turned to him, noticing the guy's appearance, and waited for him to come closer to her. Khalid dressed up for the occasion and looked a little different, if only because he had styled his hair. He took a step closer to his bride and, trying not to lose his composure, said that he wanted to look at her. The prince extended his hand to the princess's face, but she stopped him, saying that if he touched it, it would smear all his makeup. Nevertheless, he put his arm around the girl's shoulders and kissed her forehead. Khalid said that he had never seen anyone more beautiful than her. It was difficult for him because he could neither look at her nor kiss her, while Neris was especially beautiful. Distracted from the guy's compliments, the girl asked if he understood correctly that the river they were sailing along led to Iran. The prince replied that yes, and also said that Iran lived thanks to this river. Neris considered it insanely beautiful. Noticing a huge crowd of people on the shore, Neris asked the prince if there were really so many people meeting them. The ship was almost at dock. The young man said that yes, it was just that all these people had been waiting for a very long time. The girl asked what the subjects were waiting for, and Khalid, without hesitation, answered that it was her. The prince said that people had long wanted to see them together, and Neris promised that she would not disappoint the people. She asked how much longer it would take them to sail to the city. She didn't see a pier. Suddenly, Nefer joined them, and, instead of Khalid, answered that they had no intention of approaching the pier. Neris asked in confusion how they were going to get off the ship then. The cousins looked at each other and exchanged radiant, self-satisfied smiles. Without answering the princess, Khalid loudly and majestically ordered his subjects to lower the sails. The brunette was even more worried. She didn't understand how they would sail with the sails down when they were in the middle of the river. Nefer told her not to worry and just watch. The ceremony began. The subjects stood in rows, and as one, bowed before the prince, expressing their respect and submission. The priestesses, in accordance with their duties, began to sing a song about the golden raft that had returned from heaven. Neris watched in awe as the priestesses' singing caused the wind and waves to rise. The prince put his arm around her shoulders, expressing love and support, showing that he was there. Thanks to the waves caused by the sacred singing, the ship moved forward even without sails. The ceremony continued, and the world outside their ship seemed to freeze, also enchanted by the miraculous singing and beauty. Neris was born in a land without magic, but in Irina she was able to receive a magical blessing. Khalid was proud that his amazing girl with amethyst eyes was able to interest the dragon and was so strong. The magic on the deck seemed to become more obvious and tangible with each passing second, and the subjects' terras began to appear. Simon and Nefer stood a little away from the prince and princess, happy with how smoothly everything was going. Many wondered how Neris managed to find her way to the crown prince, who had not allowed anyone near him for a long time. Neris thought they had an incredibly beautiful story, but sometimes she doubted whether she could handle it. And the stunning sunset seemed to greet them warmly, beckoning them to move forward and forward. The prince took his beloved by the hand and said that it was time for them to go. He smiled slyly and asked Neris to trust him and close her eyes for a moment. Neris thought for a moment. The guy picked her up in his arms, repeated his request to close her eyes, and told her to count to 7. The girl obediently closed her eyes and began to count out loud. All her thoughts were occupied with her future husband. She felt how the young man turned around and confidently carried her somewhere. Very soon she would be his wife. She loved him, but she was not supposed to love him truly. That was their contract. The girl slowly counted to 7, as Khalid had asked, and only then opened her eyes. An amazing view opened up before the girl, and she involuntarily held her breath, peering into it. She and the prince disembarked from the ship. The girl clearly noted that they were now at their destination. Khalid solemnly announced that the Prince of the Empire had finally returned home with a beautiful wife with whom he would spend the rest of his life. Nerys and Khalid stood in the courtyard of the castle of the Great Empire, and in front of them lay a red carpet leading to the palace. The imperial family was already waiting for them there, guarded by a long line of guards standing on both sides of the path. Nerys was fascinated by the people she saw in front of her and remembered what Simon had told her about them. Before her, Emperor Senet Sirim Hartman and Empress Kalka Karim Hartman sat on thrones with their Terras. Next to his parents stood Khalid's younger brother, Prince Surid Hartman, also with his Terra. All this was confusing, and Neri began to worry greatly about her sudden acquaintance with the prince's family. Khalid reported quite officially that he had returned after fulfilling the order of His Majesty and other details. The father hurried to stop his son and painfully covered his face with one hand. He knew perfectly well that Khalid had carried out the order. He wanted to hear all these details, but a little later, another topic was more important and primary. The emperor hinted to Khalid that he would first like to hear an explanation about the young man having a bride. Khalid was a little confused. He somehow didn't think that it would be more important to start his report with this. The guy hugged his beloved close to him, carefully embracing her around the waist. The parents were surprised by their own son's determination and the fact that he and the girl were already so close. Khalid introduced the brunette to the family as Nerys Karim Hartman, the woman who would become his wife, and kissed her temple. A voice from the outside confidently proclaimed that they had to make an announcement and organize the wedding as soon as possible. A gray-haired man stood not far from them. He said that it was sad that the prince returned with a bride and did not tell anyone. It was the high priest of fire, Cyrus. He said that the wedding could not be postponed. They had to play it almost tomorrow. Father Simon, who was also present, said that the priests first had to choose a suitable date. Nerys didn't understand why there was such a rush to organize the wedding, because they had just returned. They hadn't even talked yet. The girl leaned towards the groom and quietly, so that no one could hear, asked why everyone was so excited. Khalid replied that it was because he was quite conservative, and everyone was simply happy to see her. Noticing how the prince was being courteous to his bride, the priests only became more excited and agitated. They were planning the wedding so quickly, as if they were afraid that Khalid and Nerys could change their minds at any moment. The prince smiled at Nerys and said that there was one thing she could be sure of: his modesty. Remembering how immodestly the guy had behaved with her alone, she thought that these people did not know the real Khalid. The empress rose silently from her throne as the commotion surrounding the prince and princess continued. The woman approached her son and his chosen one, and first of all turned to Nerys. Having spoken her name out loud, the empress noted that the girl was named after the goddess of the seas. Nerys wasn't worried about Khalid's mother talking to her, but she was worried about something else. The girl, looking at the woman and Khalid, felt that the two were at odds with each other. Kalka, or the empress, thoughtfully lifted the veil from the face of her son's chosen one. She confirmed that the sea goddess's name was Nerys. In the north, the goddess was also known as Andin, and in the south as Dercato. The woman smiled tenderly at the brunette and said that she hoped that the girl would meet the same end as their goddess. Nerys tried to remember what Simon had told her about this goddess, to understand what Kalka meant. The advisor said that iron was created by one of the 4 royal families. That's why the legends of different regions were different. The legends of the south and north spoke of the foolish and unhappy love of the goddess Nerys. The legend of their region is more cheerful. It was somewhat like a fairy tale, telling how a goddess fell in love with a man, and the goddess Nerys was able to cope with the fact that other gods did not accept this love, living a happy life with her lover. Nerys was still able to remember this legend now, understanding what the woman's positive wish was. But the princess was worried that the empress, for some reason, looked sad and worried. The brunette decided to remain silent and behave cautiously in general, so as not to aggravate the situation. Khalid looked at his mother with an unreadable gaze, saying nothing to her. Deciding to take matters into her own hands and get rid of the depressing atmosphere, Nerys boldly took the empress's hand. She said that if a woman would be so kind and give her blessing, it would be a great start to their marriage. The empress breathed a sigh of relief and said that, of course, she would give the children her blessing. Kalka took Nerys's hand with both hands and said that, after all, She had waited a long time for this marriage. She smiled caringly at her son's chosen one and cordially congratulated her on her arrival in Iran. Night fell upon the kingdom, and while the palace rejoiced at the return of the prince, his enemies did not sleep. The master, whom the deceased captive and her sister served, was just talking to a pregnant woman in his chambers. She lay on his lap and expressed incredible submission. The master asked the girl to tell him everything she had seen. She replied that she had seen the prince arrive at the imperial castle. The man was interested in whether the princess's powers had awakened. The woman said that Neris had tried to engrave runes, but it seemed that she needed more time to become stronger. The owner was pleased that everything was dragging on longer than expected. She suggested attacking at the wedding ceremony. She thought it was a great chance, because their vigilance would be relaxed, and Lana would soon be heading to the border. The mysterious man agreed, and said that it would be a great gift for Prince Khalid. He praised the pregnant woman who was kneeling before him. He believed that they were doing this for the sake of Irina's future. The woman was not so concerned about the fate of the kingdom. She only wanted to help her master and help him achieve his goal. The next day came. Everyone had calmed down a bit after yesterday. The weather in the kingdom was sunny and very pleasant. Neris and Nefer, accompanied by San, sailed in a small boat on the royal reservoir. Nefer unexpectedly praised the crown princess and said that she had done a great job this morning. At first, Neris didn't understand what was being discussed, but the princess said that the brunette had dealt well with Lana. In the morning, the guard cried in front of Neris and asked her to forgive her for not being able to become her knight and leaving before the wedding. The princess hastened to calm her down and said that Lana was the head of Surayev's security, and it was her duty. This understanding didn't make the girl feel any better, and the red-haired girl only began to cry harder. Neris carefully touched her subject's hand and gently asked her to stand up and calm down. The girl said that instead of an apology, she wanted Lana, as a knight, to promise her something. The crown princess asked her to promise that she would take care of herself and not be harmed until she returned to the palace. The princess was so kind and did not look upset or offended at all that it raised Lana's spirits. The red-haired girl joyfully shouted that she promised that when she returned to the castle, there would not be a single scratch on her. Now that Lana had gone to defend the border, Nefer thought that Khalid would also leave the palace immediately after the wedding. The prince's cousin was outraged that only 3 days were allocated for preparation for the wedding, although she understood why this happened. Neris thought that it would be much easier for her when they left Surayev, because there were too many eyes watching her here. Still, the capital was incredibly fascinating and sophisticated, and Neris would have liked to explore it more. She shared with Nefer that she was sorry she wouldn't be able to learn a little more about the place before she left. Neris said wistfully that she would like to know more about the place where Khalid grew up. Nefer, hoping that this would console the princess, said that the prince did not spend much time here as a child. The brunette was surprised, but listened attentively to the girl. She confirmed that Khalid was indeed born in Surayev, but because his powers were too unstable at a young age, he spent a lot of time in an isolated sanctuary. When Neris asked what the unstable powers meant, Nefer replied that the prince was born with very powerful magic. The magic was so powerful that it caused damage to the young prince. Nefer heard that the late empress had greatly helped Khalid, and he had learned to control the enormous flow of magic within himself. Even though he carried a lot of magic-suppressing items as a precaution, he was still overflowing with mana. Nefer even admitted honestly that it pissed her off that Khalid was so amazing, and Neris was glad that he was okay. The crown princess looked down, wondering if their synastry had helped Khalid. Suddenly, Nefer called out that they had arrived. This was the place where the prince had grown up, and where the wedding was to take place. They arrived at a water sanctuary, which immediately surprised and delighted the princess with its scale and beauty. Their boat sailed into the high arch of the gate, designed as a small tunnel, which was supported by snow-white columns. The inside of the tunnel was decorated with frescoes, depicting the story of Irina's origin and the creation of the sanctuary. Nefer clarified that only here could one amazing relic be seen. Simon once described her as blonde, but it was much more impressive to see her in person. It was a long fresco that depicted 2 lovers, as if a fair-haired god was lowering his hand down from the clouds, and below, as if from the water, the sea goddess extended her hand to him without taking her eyes off her lover. Neris froze, and a piercing ringing sounded in her ears. This fresco reminded her very much of something. And in that moment, Neris remembered everything. She remembered meeting Prince Khalid in the rain 10 years ago. He was much younger then, but even then he seemed determined and courageous. Khalid excitedly begged Lesley, then still Lesley, to wait for him. The crown princess's head spun from the sudden realization. San and Nefer rushed to her, concerned about the well-being of the princess, who had suddenly become ill. Neris tried to figure out if it was a dream, an illusion, or a real memory. What was Khalid doing there? She was brought out of her thoughts by a familiar voice calling her name. Khalid stood on the shore. He looked seriously at his beloved to understand what was wrong. Neris looked at his features, as if trying to find in them an answer to why she felt so strange. The realization of everything that had happened between them earlier continued to wash over her like a huge avalanche. She remembered her conversations with Khalid and his words about how they had met before, when she was not yet an actress. Khalid asked her the same question over and over again, and each time she was sure of her answer. She was always taught not to trust others, but it turned out to be much more difficult than it initially seemed. She was sure that they had met on the ship, but now she was forced to doubt everything. San and Nefer helped Neris out of the boat, and now she stood face to face with Khalid. She had to doubt even her memories, which she had once been completely confident in. Unable to suppress the trembling and excitement that were becoming stronger and stronger, the girl mumbled something indistinctly. She echoed the question, "Why?" Unable to formulate her thoughts, and tears appeared in her eyes. Her head was spinning, and the ground seemed to be slipping out from under her feet. Neris fainted, and Khalid desperately rushed to her. On the same rainy day she met Khalid, Lesley also lost her mother. That same day she met a madam who took her in and completely changed her life. Lesley considered what she expected from her life. She did not expect to die. She did not expect her mother to return. The only thing the girl was waiting for was the boy who promised to come back for her. He promised that he would take her with him to his kingdom, and they would be happy, so he asked her to wait for him. Khalid appeared before her on a rainy day, like a mirage, and quickly disappeared. But she waited for him. She knew she had to live, so that she could meet him again sometime in the future. Whether by asking for sympathy or by lying, she had to survive even in the dirt. The boy's words that they would definitely see each other again always echoed in my head. She felt she had to survive to hear his voice again, at least once. She promised him that. After some time, Neris woke up in her chambers, lying on her bed, and next to her sat a woman unknown to her. Neris sat up on the bed and greeted her, trying to figure out who she had the honor of talking to. The woman greeted her back and introduced herself as Sharika, a priestess of the earth. Neris looked at her, thoughtfully repeating her name in her thoughts, to remember what Simon had told her about her. Shakira, guessing the girl's thoughts, confirmed that she was the wife of Caliph, the noisiest of all whom she could know. Neris said nothing and looked around for Khalid, but the guy was not in the room. Sharika smiled reservedly at her almost relative. The woman explained that the prince wanted to stay with her until she woke up, but the emperor called him, and he had to leave. Neris was surprised by the woman's insight, and sheepishly said that she wasn't embarrassed about Khalid, or anything like that. The girl explained that Khalid simply appeared in her dream, and it was a very strange dream. Suddenly, the priestess answered her that it was not a dream at all, as Neris thought. It was a fragment of the princess's forgotten memories that, unexpectedly for them, began to be restored. The girl excitedly asked again what kind of memories and wanted to know what she knew. The priestess answered honestly that only Prince Khalid knew about the essence of the memories. She admitted that, at the prince's request, she had planned to help Neris remember everything, but now there was no need for that. Initially, Sharika wanted to return Neris's memories on her wedding day or after it, but it so happened that the girl's will was stronger, and she managed without outside interference. Sharika poured the girl a glass of water and said that it was her will that began to push her to remember on its own. The girl took the glass of water and hesitantly said that she was still not sure what exactly she had seen. She was told that it was because the person who caused her to lose her memory wanted it to be impossible to restore. Neri asked if she understood correctly that someone had done this deliberately. She had lost her memory. The priestess admitted that she had to look into the girl's memories, and she knew that this had been going on for a long time. Neris was shocked. She couldn't even imagine that someone could do such a mean thing to her. For some reason, she remembered the instructor's words about taking away someone else's things, but not allowing them to take away something of yours. Her hands were shaking. She guessed that it was most likely the instructor who had deprived her of her memory. She couldn't believe that they had treated her so cruelly, because for 10 years these people had been her only family. Shakira was quick to reassure the girl and told her that she should view the loss of her memories as a simple illness. It was worth imagining that she had been ill for a long time and would need time to recover, but this meant that she could be cured. Neris was very eager to know what she would need to do to correct the current situation. At that moment, an excited, heavily breathing Khalid ran into the room and immediately rushed towards the girl. Shakira, deciding that her presence was no longer necessary, picked up her cane and headed out of the room. Before she left, she asked Khalid to talk to her after he was done with Neris. She had something to say. The prince agreed, and so the priestess left with peace of mind, leaving the crown princess in the care of Khalid. The dark-haired girl was glad to see her lover, but at the same time, she was overcome with excitement. She was so confused by the recent events that she couldn't even look him in the eye. But Khalid, noticing the confusion, showed sensitivity and placed the lanon on the girl's cheek, addressing her by name. He asked Neris with concern whether she had slept well and whether she had had enough rest. She couldn't find the strength to answer even that. A veil of tears clouded her amethyst eyes. She wanted to ask the prince so many questions, to reconstruct all the events in her head, but she could not ask him a single one. She, for example, was interested to know what he did that day and why he looked so desperate. It was no less interesting to ask Khalid why he had to disappear so suddenly. She wanted to know how the guy managed to find her and what it was like for him during her unconsciousness. The prince suddenly spoke. He wanted to explain everything to her, but he could not find the right words to begin his story. Instead of trying to pick them up, he rushed forward and hugged Neris. It was something they both needed at that moment. Khalid held her close and earnestly asked the girl to listen to him carefully. He said he knew how hard it was for her, but he promised to be there. She could ask him any questions she wanted. He wanted her to rest and come to her senses. No one was going to rush her. They still had plenty of time together. Khalid left Neri alone in the room, allowing the girl to be alone and think about everything that happened to her that day. Shakira was waiting outside the door. She told the boy that not only had Neris forgotten the past, some of her memories had been altered. She didn't know how to do this without using magic, so it was obvious that Neris had ill wishers. Shakira said that if it weren't for their synastry and the princess's inner strength, it would have been difficult to access her memories. She also said that she heard the princess's inner voice when she was in her head. If everything went well and Neris managed to awaken the magic, the restoration of memories and strength would be a matter of time.